All right, folks, welcome to the Great American Mail live stream of the January 6th, 8th, supposedly the final hearing. If you enjoy this content, if you like this, please subscribe, hit the notification bell so you'll get notification next time that we come on and clip and share this with friends. Folks, this is the Great American Mail, the commentator that analyzes the events of the day, in this case, the hearings, under the lens of the Constitution, the law, and history. As you can see here, the January 6th committee is getting ready to have their 8th and final hearing tonight. Tonight, they are supposed to be focused on Trump's dereliction of duty. That would be the dereliction in terms of not doing anything for 187 minutes while the protesters on the Capitol had gotten out of control. So we'll see. We've been talking about this a lot. This is something that they said that they were going to be able to do at some point. I don't think they're going to be able to do it, honestly. I don't think they're going to be able to pull it off. I've said that from the very beginning. For a variety of reasons, is that one, and perhaps the biggest reason here, folks, that all you really need to know is the biggest reason they're not going to be able to pull it off is that dereliction of duty is such a high standard to meet, right? I mean, it's not easy to meet that, right? And it's basically because of something called the business judgment rule. Under the business judgment rule, if there are two or competing different objective ways in which you could conduct yourself, as long as yours was objectively reasonable, then you can't be held for dereliction of duty. So I just don't see how they're going to be able to do it. The other problem that they have here, folks, all right, is that there's no such thing as dereliction of duty for the President of the United States. Let's go over here while we're waiting these people to come. And we've got a couple of feeds here. We're not sure which one we're going to go with tonight. But let's go to a couple of articles here. In fact, let me do this. I did this earlier today. If you subscribe to the YouTube channel, the last video, well, that's not true. Make sure. Yeah, the last video we did was on dereliction of duty. Let's put dereliction of duty Trump in the Google, okay? So my search engine in the Google is Google. So let's see what they come up with, right? And we did this today in that short video. It's about 6 minutes. We're going to do it again for you folks here right now so you can see what's going on. And so take a look here. Let's scroll down. So the first story is the Bulwark. Let's see if the Bulwark cites any law. Let's see if the Bulwark says, okay, here's the law where somebody, okay, here it is right here. The manual for courts martial. Okay, well, that's nice. Somebody's in the military. Trump's not in the military. As you know, America's president is the commander-in-chief, but he's a civilian. So that ain't going to do us any good. All right, so let's go down here to the New York Times. Let's see if they got any law in there. Let's see if they come up with any law. Yeah, scrolling. I'm not seeing any statutes. I'm not seeing any law. I'm just seeing a bunch of talk. Okay, so the New York Times doesn't have it. All right, let's see if Newsweek has it. Okay, maybe Newsweek has it. Oh, wait. Here you go. United States Code, Title 10, Section 892, Article 92. Let's copy that. Let's paste it. See if it comes up. It should. Our friends at Cornell should have that. Bingo, bango. You can tell I do a lot of this, folks. They're our friends at Cornell. 10 U.S.C. Code, Section 892, Article 92. You could have done that yourself. All you got to do is cut and paste it right out of that Newsweek article. There it was. I copied it. I pasted it. Bing. There you have the law, the United States Code. All right, any person subject to this chapter. But Trump's not subject to this chapter. So why is Newsweek citing you something which he says right here applies to all branches of the U.S. military? Okay, well, that's not Trump. But let's go ahead, just for the sake of the argument, let's imagine it applied to Trump, okay? So violates or fails to obey any lawful general order or regulation. Well, that's not Trump because he gives orders. He's the President of the United States. He's the Commander-in-Chief. Okay. Having knowledge of any other lawful order issued by a member of the armed services, which it is his duty to obey, fails to obey the order. Okay, again, Trump gives orders. He's the Commander-in-Chief. Can't get any higher than him. Can't be him. Is derelict in his performance of his duty shall be punished as a court-martial may direct. Well, a lot of problems here. Again, this chapter doesn't apply to him. B, is derelict in his performance of duties, I've already said, is a judgment call, and you can't objectively say what Trump did. And we're going to get to what Trump supposedly did in a moment. Okay, but you can't say that what Trump did was derelict in his duties if there was objectively somebody else could have done the same thing, right? Just because you disagree, and that's all they have, folks, is, hey, we think you should have gone and spoken to the people that were inside the Capitol sooner. Okay, so what? That doesn't mean that I had to do it. It just means that was your opinion, okay? And it doesn't mean I have to do it. So let me, anyway, and again here, shall be punished as a court-martial may direct. Well, even assuming he were subject in the military, which he is not, he's no longer in the military, which he was never, and so a court-martial has no power over him. So here's what you're going to see. I'm just pulling this up, folks. Here's what you're going to see from the committee tonight. Hold on, Kayla McEnany. Hold on. We're going to get to you. Make sure your volume's up there. All right, cool. So here's what you're going to hear tonight from the January 6th committee. Now, we've just walked you through the law. They have no law. They have nothing, folks. Believe me, I've been covering this stuff. This is the 8th hearing I've covered. We've written a lot on our Substack page. And by the way, if you want to subscribe to this channel or any of our other channels, there's a link tree in there. You can do that. I just want to make sure that they're not going and we miss anything here. Let's refresh it so we didn't miss anything. And let's check it out over here. Make sure we didn't miss anything. I just don't want to miss the hearing, folks. We should have 4 minutes.
Let's talk about the importance of
we're gonna silence the ad here. We don't need to see that. All right, I think we got a few minutes. Here's what you're gonna hear. Let me kill that ad, by the way. All right, and yeah, they're still not going. Okay, so we got a few more minutes. Here's what you're gonna hear tonight, folks. This is not dereliction of duty. Sorry to spoil it for you, but cut to the chase, not dereliction of duty. But here's what you're going to hear a lot of tonight from the January 6th committee. And maybe listen, folks, I'm happy to be proven wrong. Would be happy to be proven wrong if they have something, but I suspect they don't have more than this. Take a listen.
Dining room the whole time that the attack on the Capitol was going on, or did he ever go to, again, only to your knowledge, to the Oval Office, to the White House Situation Room, anywhere else?
To the best of my recollection, he was always in the dining room.
Yeah, what did they say, Mr. Meadows or the president? And all during that brief encounter that you were in the dining room, what do you recall?
I think everybody was watching the TV.
Do you know whether he was watching TV in the dining room?
I'm going to let you hear a little bit more of this, folks. I don't want you to feel like you're getting deprived of anything. But listen, folks, okay, so what? So maybe he felt like he should allow the authorities to take it under control. Perhaps he had already told Mike Pence, which they've already admitted, to call out the National Guard. Perhaps he told Mike Pence to contact General Milley to call out the National Guard. All of those under the business judgment rule are reasonable things to do. Just because you would have done it differently doesn't make it a dereliction of duty. So as per usual, unless we get something different out of these folks, it is going to be another show trial, which is, let me just try to smear you, make you look bad. In hindsight, go, what if you had done this? Well, we don't really know what would have happened because we don't have a Stargate. We don't have a time machine. Here's more of what you're going to hear. Let me kill that so we don't. Sorry, the PBS NewsHour folks. So here's just more of this. I suspect it'll be all this.
You talked to him on January 6th?
It's my understanding he was watching television.
When you were in the dining room in these discussions, was the violence of the Capitol visible on the screen on the television?
Yes, right.
All right, so that's Pat Cipollone. So, folks, they have a lot of that, but they don't have anything else. And so, it's kind of like the old Seinfeld towards the end when they get in trouble for being innocent bystanders. And Jackie Childs comes up and says, you can't be guilty when you're an innocent bystander. That's the whole notion of being an innocent bystander. You're innocent. Right? The whole idea that Trump could have somehow controlled the riot. If it was truly a riot, nobody controls a riot. That's why it's a riot. It's the very nature of a riot. So I don't think we're going to see anything here new other than just more smear jobs. And I just want to make sure we're refreshing here so we don't miss anything. So just in time, and to show you how all this stuff works, folks, yesterday evening, we got from the New York Times, I mean, the demagogue in chief, right? The principal rag of the country right now. We are retired generals and admirals. Trump's actions on January 6th were a dereliction of duty. Okay, so basically, I remember when I never fell for it, but I remember when they first started doing this stuff a few years back, and you would have these people, and they just go find a couple of people that lack compunction, right? That are willing. Let me see if I can get this in theater mode. That'd be perfect. Yeah, let's hope that comes. All right, cool. That lack compunction and are willing to come out and say things they have no business saying, right? It doesn't prove anything, right? And again, just to make sure I'm not just, wrong here, let's see if they get to any statute or any law. No, nothing. It's not even that long. We should be able to go through the whole doggone thing here. But there's no statute, there's no law. Folks, they're claiming they've got evidence of a crime. You need a statute, which has elements, right? And typically the elements are laid out, and typically there's a mental element. We've covered Steve Bannon the last couple of days, and a lot of people are out there saying, oh, all the committee had to do, or the January 6th committee and the government prosecuting Bannon had to do is show that there was a subpoena and that had a date, and he missed the date. Well, no, we looked at the statute on our live stream, because we do that.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from...
Sorry. Anyway, we go to the law. We go to the actual sources. And the statute actually says you have to be found to have willfully not shown up or complied with subpoena. Well, willfully is a mental element, so-called mens rea in the law, right? And so if you've got that, then that's not going to be able to get you there. All right. Well, it looks like we're going to be pretty close to the hearing. Let's go back. I'm going to closely monitor it here. Let me refresh it, make sure we don't miss it. And
investigating the attack on the U.S. Capitol.
I'm going to turn this down.
This is the 8th.
All right. I'm going to turn this down. We should go live. I'm probably not going to use the other feed, but let me turn it down too and go ahead and refresh it. So we may have two feeds here. Let's get back to these retired generals. And they're live there, so we won't miss anything. Okay. The inquiry by the House's January 6th committee has produced many startling findings, but none to us more alarming than the fact that while rioters, again, they're calling them rioters. If they're really rioters, then there's nothing you can do. And I'm sorry, folks. I have a cold. I've had a cold for a couple of days, so I'm a little under the weather here. Rioters tried to thwart the peaceful transfer of power and ransack the Capitol on January 6, 2021. The President and Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump, abdicated his duty to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So translation, folks, they disagree with what Trump did. That is not dereliction of duty. All right, folks, I see the committee coming in, so let's get back over there and let's see what they have to say.
Committee Chair Representative Benny Thompson recently tested positive for COVID-19. That was just this week, so he's going to be presiding over the hearing remotely, along with his co-chair, Congresswoman Liz Cheney. These are live pictures from the hearing room at the Capitol.
Committee will be in order
now.
Good evening. Earlier this week, I received a positive COVID diagnosis.
We don't care, Benny.
Per CDC guidelines, I've received the initial 2 shots and all of the boosters. Thus far, I've been blessed to experience very minimal symptoms. Because I'm still quarantined, I cannot participate in person with my colleagues. I've asked our Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney, to preside over this evening's hearing, including maintaining order in the room and swearing in our witnesses. Over the last month and a half, the Select Committee has told the story of a president who did everything in his power to overturn an election. He lied, he bullied, he betrayed his oath. He tried to destroy our democratic institutions. He summoned a mob to
classic overreach. We've seen this before, folks.
On January 6th, when he knew that the assembled mob was heavily armed and angry, he commanded the mob to go to the Capitol, and he emphatically commanded the heavily armed mob to fight.
I mean,
like
that's
hell.
just an outright lie, folks.
For the weeks
no
between
weapons, none, no knives, no guns were found.
And January 6th, Donald Trump was a force to be reckoned with. He shrugged off the factuality and legality, correct, sober advice of his knowledgeable and sensible advisors. Instead, he recklessly blazed a path of lawlessness and corruption, the cost to which democracy be damned.
Ooh.
And then he stopped.
Profanity doesn't go over very well.
For 187 minutes on January 6th, this man of unbridled destructive energy could not be moved. Not by his aides, not by his allies, not by the violent chants of rioters or the desperate pleas of those facing down the riot. And more tellingly, Donald Trump ignored and disregarded the desperate pleas of his own family, including Ivanka and Don Jr. Even though he was the only person in the world who could call off the mob, he sent to the Capitol. He could not be moved to rise from his dining room table and walked the few steps down the White House hallway into the press briefing room where cameras were anxiously and desperately waiting to carry his message to the armed and violent mob, savagely beating and killing law enforcement officers.
Oh my God.
Revenging the Capitol.
Oh my God. Not
and hunting
one
down
Capitol officer
the
was
Vice
killed.
President and various members of Congress.
This is...
He could not be moved. This evening, my colleagues, Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois and Ms. Luria of Virginia, will take you inside the White House during those 187 minutes. We also remind you of what was happening at the Capitol minute by minute as the final violent, tragic part of Donald Trump's scheme to cling to power unraveled while he ignored his advisors, stood by and watched it unfold on television. Let me offer a final thought about the Select Committee's work so far. As we've made clear throughout these hearings, our investigation goes forward. We continue to receive new information every day. We continue to hear from witnesses. We will reconvene in September to continue laying out our findings to the American people. But as that work goes forward, a number of facts are clear. There can be no doubt that there was a coordinated, multi-step effort to overturn an election overseen and directed by Donald Trump. There can be no doubt that he commanded a mob he knew was heavily armed, violent, and angry, to march on the Capitol to try to stop the peaceful transfer of power. And he made targets out of his own vice president and the lawmakers gathered to do the people's work. These facts have gone undisputed. And so there needs to be accountability.
Well, there's no undisputed because there's no opposition there. Goodness gracious.
Accountability to the American people. Accountability at every level, from the local precincts in many states where Donald Trump and his allies attacked election workers for just doing their jobs, all the way up to the Oval Office, where Donald Trump embraced the legal advice of insurrectionists that a federal judge has already said was a coup in search of a legal theory. Our democracy withstood the attack on January 6th. If there's no accountability for January 6th, for every part of this scheme, I fear that we will not overcome the ongoing threat to our democracy. There must be stiff consequences for those responsible. Now I'll turn things over to our vice chair to start telling this story.
All right, folks. So this is very typical of what we've seen from this committee. I will have to say this is as bad as I've seen Benny Thompson lie. I believe in being fair. Perhaps he's just the COVID is messing with his brain. They were not heavily armed. Not one single firearm or knife or any weapon of any kind, unless you consider zip ties, in a Viking helmet weapons, right? No Capitol officers were killed. They were not heavily armed. I mean, he's just reaching as he's been doing for a while. Maybe he's not feeling well. Also, this has been very much par for the course. Everybody gets in. What they do is both co-chairs, Thompson and Cheney, get to blather on for a couple of minutes. It's usually not very effective. It's very repetitive. Juries don't like to hear that. They want to get to the evidence. And then usually the two people presenting, so Luria and Kinzinger, will also make openings. So, folks, it's probably going to be about 8 or 9 minutes. They each get about 2.5, 3 minutes here before we get to any real quote-unquote evidence. But anyway, let's see what Cheney has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Without objection, the presiding officer is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, I announce that the committee has approved the release of the deposition material presented during today's hearing. And let me begin tonight by wishing Chairman Thompson.
Now, so I want to say real quickly here, this is another thing they've been doing. We're a bunch of plebes. We're supposed to be happy that she's giving us the limited depth. We've seen it tonight. If you watch my live stream, it's been preserved, so you don't need to worry about seeing it again. But they're going to give the plebes a few crumbs. The depositions that we released tonight, yeah, we'll give them to you. But the rest of their evidence, folks, is closed behind, closed doors. You can't get only the special people like them can see it, or their media friends who they leak it to, which is a felony, by the way, never prosecuted all the time.
A rapid recovery from COVID.
Yeah, again, we don't care.
He has expertly led us through 8 hearings so far, and he has brought us to the point we are today. In our initial hearing, the chairman and
folks, anybody that's ever been trained in presentation, they will tell you, don't refer to your colleagues as doing a good job or doing something expertly, because it just makes you look like she just looked. I mean, nobody cares, right? If you want to say get well, just say get well.
What ultimately became Donald Trump's 7-part plan to overturn the 2020 presidential election.
Ooh, this
is new.
7-part plan. That's new.
Election day through January 6th. At the close of today's hearing, our 9th, we will have addressed each element of that plan. But in the course of these hearings, we have received new evidence, and new witnesses have bravely stepped forward. Efforts to litigate and overcome immunity and executive privilege claims have been successful, and those continue. Doors have opened, new subpoenas have been issued, and the dam has begun to break. And now, even as we conduct our 9th hearing, we have considerably more to do. We have far more evidence to share with the American people and more to gather. So our committee will spend August pursuing emerging information on multiple fronts before convening further hearings this September. Today,
okay, folks, that's new because they had told us before they started this was going to be the last one. Now they're saying we're going to reconvene in September, so that's new information. My best guess is they'll probably do it in August or sooner.
Far more about the president's plans and actions to overturn the election than almost all members of Congress did when President Trump was impeached on January 13th, 2021, or when he was tried by the Senate in February of that year. 57 of 100 senators voted to convict President Trump at that time, and more than 20 others said they were voting against conviction because the president's term had already expired. At the time, the Republican leader of the United States Senate said this about Donald Trump.
A mob was assaulting the Capitol in his name. These criminals were carrying his banners, hanging his flags, and screaming their loyalty to him. It was obvious that only President Trump could end this. He was the only one.
Leader McConnell reached those conclusions.
That's pretty effective stuff, folks. It doesn't really mean anything because in the fog of war at the time, everybody was upset. Everybody was really angry. So, McConnell saying that at the time probably wasn't that far out of order. Now what we know, it seems kind of silly. And again, you can't control a mob. But anyway, very effective use there by the committee.
Based on what he knew then, without any of the much more detailed evidence you will see today. Lawlessness and violence began at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, before 1 p.m., and continued until well after darkness fell. What exactly was our Commander-in-Chief doing during the hours of violence? Today, we address precisely that issue. Everything you've heard in these hearings thus far will help you understand President Trump's motives during the violence. You already know Donald Trump's goal: to halt or delay Congress's official proceedings to count certified electoral votes. You know that Donald Trump tried to pressure his vice president to illegally reject votes and delay the proceedings. You know he tried to convince state officials and state legislators to flip their electoral votes from Biden to Trump. And you know Donald Trump tried to corrupt our Department of Justice to aid his scheme. But by January 6th, none of that had worked. Only one thing was succeeding on the afternoon of January 6th. Only one thing was achieving President Trump's goal. The angry, armed mob President Trump sent to the Capitol broke through security, invaded the Capitol, and forced the vote counting to stop.
Now, folks, we've covered this many times, and you probably won't hear this on any other live stream. They just keep pounding this. It makes no sense. she talks about that he was trying to challenge Biden's certification. They had fake electors, right? We've got articles up this at our Substack page, greatamericanbell.substack.page. You can find a link to it in our link tree in the description. Folks, the last person who wanted violence on that day was Donald Trump. Why? Because he had 6 states, he had 8 senators and 139 congresspeople ready to object. There were going to be days upon days upon days of that certification. It was going to last several days. Now, I don't know if he was ultimately going to be able to stop Biden. We don't know. But we all know that when the violence took the Capitol, the objections to the certification stopped. They paused for 4 hours and they came back. There were no objections. So I don't know why they continue to beat this dead horse, but it definitely is a dead horse. It doesn't make any sense at all. Not
That
legal.
mob was violent and destructive, and many came armed. As you will hear, Secret Service agents protecting the vice president were exceptionally concerned about his safety and their own. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy was scared, as were others in Congress, even those who themselves helped to provoke the violence. And as you will see today, Donald Trump's own White House counsel, his own White House staff, members of his own family, all implored him to immediately intervene to condemn the violence and instruct his supporters to stand down, leave the Capitol, and disperse. For multiple hours, he would not. Donald Trump would not get on the phone and order the military or law enforcement agencies to help. And for hours, Donald Trump chose not to answer the pleas from Congress, from his own party, and from all across our nation to do what his oath required. He refused to defend our nation and our Constitution. He refused to do what every American president must. In the days after January 6th, almost no one of any political party would defend President Trump's conduct, and no one should do so today. Thank you, and I now recognize the gentlewoman from Virginia.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Article 2 of our Constitution requires that the President swear a very specific oath every 4 years. Every President swears or affirms to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of their ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The President also assumes the constitutional duty to take care that our nation's laws be faithfully executed, and is the Commander-in-Chief of our military. Our hearings have shown the many ways in which President Trump tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power in the days leading up to January 6th. With each step of his plan, he betrayed his oath of office and was derelict in his duty. Tonight, we will further examine President Trump's actions on the day of the attack on the Capitol. Early that afternoon, President Trump instructed tens of thousands of supporters at and near the Ellipse rally, a number of whom he knew were armed with various types of weapons, to march to the Capitol.
See, again, folks, this is just more examples of amateur hour. Folks, if they were armed, right, why did none of them show up at the Capitol? Their point is that he wanted armed people to go. You don't even need it, and you can't prove it, so don't do something stupid so I can sit here and go, but no arms were found.
Crowd to
It's
march
just an
multiple
unnecessary lie.
times. He promised he would be with them and finished his remarks at 1:10 p.m. like this.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol. So let's walk down.
All right, now, are they going to take out peacefully and patriotically? That's the last thing he said. Peacefully and patriotically make your voice heard. Let's see if it's in there. I bet it's not.
Pennsylvania Avenue.
See, there you go.
By this
Cut
time,
off.
the Vice
Peacefully and
President was
patriotically.
in the Capitol. The joint session of Congress to certify Joe Biden's victory was underway, and the Proud Boys and other rioters had stormed through the first barriers and begun the attack. Radio communications from law enforcement informed Secret Service and those in the White House Situation Room of these developments in real time. At the direction of President Trump, thousands more rioters marched from the Ellipse to the Capitol, and they joined the attack. As you will see in great detail tonight, President Trump was being advised by nearly everyone to immediately instruct his supporters to leave the Capitol, disperse, and halt the violence. Virtually everyone told President Trump to condemn the violence in clear and unmistakable terms. And those on Capitol Hill and across the nation begged President Trump to help. But the former president chose not to do
she looks like
what
she's
all
reading.
of those people
I
begged.
hadn't realized that they were reading these
He refused to
statements.
tell the mob to leave until 4:17 when he tweeted out a video statement filmed in the Rose Garden, ending with this.
So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Again, just amateur hour continues. I mean, now we're talking about amateur day, amateur week. That you don't need that. You don't need to smear him with that. Just you need to establish that there's 187 minutes before he did that which you claims, subjectively that he should have done.
By that time, 2 pipe bombs had been found at locations near the Capitol, including where the vice president-elect was conducting a meeting. Hours of hand-to-hand combat had seriously injured scores of law enforcement officers.
Oh, my God.
The
Hand-to-hand
Capitol had been
combat.
invaded. The electoral count had been halted as members were evacuated. Rioters took the floor of the Senate. They rifled through desks and broke into offices, and they nearly caught up to Vice President Pence. Guns were drawn on the House floor, and a rioter was shot attempting to infiltrate the chamber. We know that a number of rioters intended acts of physical violence against...
Folks, I'm assuming that rioter she's talking about is Ashley Babbitt. She wasn't just shot. She was murdered. She was killed. I mean, this is unbelievable.
...specific elected officials. We know virtually all the rioters were motivated by President Trump's rhetoric that the election had been stolen, and they felt they needed to take their country back. This hearing is principally about what...
How are they going to do that? I mean, seriously, how are they going to take their country back by interrupting Donald Trump's attempt to challenge Biden's certification? See, this is the problem. They've overpromised. They've underdelivered. They have nowhere to go. They've painted themselves into a corner. They have nowhere to go with this.
Inside of the White House that afternoon, from the time when President Trump ended his speech until the moment when he finally told the mob to go home, a span of 187 minutes, more than 3 hours. What you will learn is that President Trump sat in his dining room and watched the attack on television, while his senior-most staff, closest advisors, and family members begged him to do what is expected of any American president. I served proudly for 20 years as an officer in the United States Navy. Veterans of our armed forces know firsthand the leadership that's required in a time of crisis. Urgent and decisive action.
She's the first
that
one
puts
I've noticed that
duty and
seems to be
country
reading
first.
this. This is
But on
really
January
not good.
6th,
I
when
hadn't noticed
lives
that before.
and our democracy hung in the balance, President Trump refused...
See, how does it hang in the... Let's assume for the sake of the argument they captured Pence, they hung Pence, and they hung Pelosi. Are you telling me the United States ends at that point? Really? After all we've been through, it ends then? They can't
because
sustain
of his
that.
selfish desire to stay in power. And I yield to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Kinzinger.
They keep saying that it was his selfish desire to stay in power, but he felt like he won the election again.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Loria.
Let's see if he reads
1
as
week
well.
after the attack, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy acknowledged the simple truth. President Trump should have acted immediately to stop the violence. During our investigation, General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also remarked on the president's failure to act. Let's hear what they had to say.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump.
Yeah. You're the commander-in-chief. You got an assault going on the capital of the United States of America. And there's nothing. No call, nothing, zero.
More effective with McCarthy there, honestly. Everybody knows Milley's a partisan hack that hates Trump, but
Like my
The
colleague
McCarthy
from
stuff was
Virginia, I'm a
effective.
veteran. I served in the Air Force, and
We
I
don't care.
serve currently in the Air National Guard.
Nobody cares.
I can tell you that General Milley's reaction to President Trump's conduct is 100% correct.
See, here we go again. Judge, jury, prosecution, appellate court. Like, I can tell you it's 100% correct. Okay, yeah, we can make up our own
So
mind. Adam.
was Leader McCarthy's. What explains President Trump's behavior? Why did he not take immediate action in a time of crisis? Because President Trump's plan for January 6th was to halt or delay Congress's official proceeding to count the votes. The mob attacked.
No, but see, he already had a plan to do that. You had objections set for 6 to 7 states. That was going to take days, folks. We know fact the mob caused that not to happen. How was the mob supposed to delay it? Let's assume they get in there and it takes a couple of days to clear it out. It doesn't do Trump any good because when they finally cleared it out, they all voted. I don't know where they're going with this.
Capitol
They don't know either, by the
way. The mob attacking the Capitol quickly caused the evacuation of both the House and the Senate. The count ground to an absolute halt and was ultimately delayed for hours. The mob was accomplishing President Trump's purpose, so of course he didn't intervene.
Okay, now again, this is the first time they've tried to explain this, so let's understand this. They basically delayed the count for about 4 hours, right? So they all reconvened. They had already started the objection. They were on Arizona at 1:10 when the Capitol gets breached. So we know that they spent about 4 or 5 hours to get peace back, and then they came back around 7, 8 o'clock, and they finished in the early hours. So again, the mob didn't accomplish it. In fact, they bought him less time than he would have gotten from his 8 senators and his 139 Congress people ready to object. So this doesn't make any sense at all. If what he wanted was a few days of delay, he was better off with his own plan. In fact, the mob thwarted his plan.
Here's what will be clear by the end of this hearing. President Trump did not fail to act during the 187 minutes between leaving the ellipse and telling the mob to go home. He chose not to act. But there were hundreds that day who honored their oaths and put their lives on the line to protect the people inside the Capitol and to safeguard our democracy. Many of them are here tonight with us, and many more are watching from home. As you already know, and we'll see again tonight, their service and sacrifice shines a bright light on President Trump's dishonor and dereliction of duty. I yield to the Vice Chair.
Thank you very much,
Thankfully,
Mr. Kinzinger.
more short there.
I'd like to begin by welcoming our witnesses this evening. Tonight, we're joined by Mr. Matthew Pottinger. Mr. Pottinger is a decorated former Marine intelligence officer who served.
Now, folks, if history is any guide to this from the first 7 hearings, there'll be Republicans, but there'll be anti-Trump Republicans that clearly hate the president.
This nation on tours of duty in Afghanistan and Iraq. He served in the Trump White House from the first day of the administration through the early morning hours of January 7th, 2021. The last role in which he served in the White House was as Deputy National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. We're also joined by Sarah Matthews. Ms. Matthews started her career in communications, working on Capitol Hill, serving on the Republican staffs of several House committees. She then worked as Deputy Press Secretary for President Trump's re-election campaign before joining the Trump White House in June of 2020. She served there as Deputy Press Secretary and Special Assistant to the President until the evening of January 6th, 2021. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands.
There's no reason to go through this charade. You can swear witnesses before we do that and say they've been
Do you
sworn.
swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. You may be seated.
And folks, I
Let
say
the
that
record reflect
not
that
to
the
be
witnesses
a
answered
pain,
in the affirmative.
but I say it to just prove, that this is a show.
For being
That's
here
all.
tonight.
It just shows the show
Mr.
nature of it.
Pottinger, thank you for your service to the nation, as well as for joining us this evening. Can you please briefly explain what your responsibilities were as Deputy National Security Advisor to the President?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. When I started at the White House, I was a senior director for Asia on the National Security Council staff, so that was a job that involved helping coordinate the president's Asia policy. I supported the president when he met or interacted with Asian leaders. Later, 2019, I was promoted to the job of Deputy National Security Advisor. In that role, I was the chairman of the Deputies Committee. That's an NSC meeting of all of the deputy cabinet secretaries. We would settle important matters of national policy related to our national security, and we would also tee up options for the president and for his cabinet members. It was, I felt then, as I do now, that it was a privilege to serve in the White House. I'm also very proud of President Trump's foreign policy accomplishments. We were able to finally compete with China. We were also able to broker peace agreements between Israel and 3 Arab states. I mean, those are some examples of the types of policies that I think made our country safer.
Thank you, Ms. Pottinger. And were you in the White House during the attack on the Capitol on January 6th?
For most of the day, I was in the White House, although when the president was speaking at the rally, I was actually off-site at a scheduled meeting with India's ambassador to the United States. The National Security Council staff was not involved in organizing the security for what was a domestic event, the rally, but I did return to the White House at roughly 2:30 p.m.
Thank you, and I know my colleagues will have additional questions for you about that afternoon. Let me turn now to you, Ms. Matthews. How did you come to join President Trump's White House staff?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. As you outlined, I am a lifelong Republican, and I joined the Trump re-election campaign in June of 2019. I was one of the first communications staffers actually on board for his re-election campaign. And during that time, I traveled all around the country and met Kayleigh McEnany, who was also working on his re-election campaign. I worked there for a year, and I formed a close relationship with Ms. McEnany, and she moved over to the White House in April of 2020 to start as White House press secretary, and she brought over a group of campaign staff with her, and so I joined her over at the White House in June of 2020 to start as her deputy.
And were you, Ms. Matthews, at work in the White House on January 6th?
Yes, I was working out of the West Wing that day.
Thank you.
Just consistent with what I said, just establishing that they're Republicans.
From Illinois.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. As you've seen in our prior hearings, President Trump summoned the mob to D.C. on January 6th. Before he went on stage, he knew some of them were armed and prepared for combat. During his speech, he implored them to march to the Capitol, as he had always planned to do. By the time he walked off the stage, his supporters had already breached the outer perimeter of the Capitol at the foot of Capitol Hill.
Folks, it's highly unusual for, among the show trials in America are highly unusual for you to say, basically, Your Honor, let me make a statement before I put this witness on the stand. We all know that Donald Trump had armed, and they keep saying this even though no weapons were found. So I don't know why they keep getting back to this, but it's very unusual for you to be able to say, let me tell you a bunch of stuff, because you're basically, the witnesses are sitting there going, oh, I know what you want me to say, and then they're going to say it. These people are not even pretending remotely. And notice how easy it is. You've got two sympathetic witnesses. You know they're sympathetic. You've interviewed them before. You've probably deposed them before. And she can't help herself but sit here and make a little statement about what they're going to say and what they should say.
We've received new testimony from a security professional working in the White House complex on January 6th, with access to relevant information and responsibility to report to national security officials. This security official told us that the White House was aware of multiple reports of weapons in the crowd that morning. We as a committee are cognizant of the fear of retribution expressed by certain national security witnesses who have come forward to tell the truth. We've therefore taken steps to protect this national security individual's identity. Listen to this clip from their testimony.
What was the consistent message from the people about this idea of the president to walk to the Capitol?
So there's a couple things going on here. They do this a lot. They've done this second time they've done this, where they say, oh, well, somebody comes forward and we've got to protect their identity. That's a smear job. That doesn't happen. The other thing you have to understand, under Western law, under Roman law, under American law, under British law, every law, you're entitled to face your accusers. The notion that, they got to be kept secret because somebody's going to go after them is just garbage. Not to mention, this is not news. This was established a hearing ago and the hearing before that. Basically, you'll recall that they had these scanning devices that were there, and Trump wanted, Trump was obsessed with the crowd. He said, let them in, get rid of the scanners, let them in. I don't care that they're armed. They're not here to get me. And of course, they made a big deal about that. So this is nothing new other than one more person confirming something we've already known.
We were all in a state of shock.
Because why?
Because it's just, one, I think the actual physical feasibility of doing it, and then also we all knew what that implicated and what that meant. That this was no longer a rally, that this was going to move to something else if he physically walked to the Capitol. I don't know if you want to use the word insurrection, coup, whatever. We all knew that this would move from a normal, democratic, public event into something else.
What was driving that sentiment, considering this part of it, the actual breach of the Capitol, hadn't happened yet?
Why were we alarmed?
Right.
The president wanted to lead tens of thousands of people to the Capitol. I think that was enough grounds for us to be alarmed.
Even though he understood
That's his
many of his
personal
supporters
opinion. Who
were
cares?
armed, the president was still adamant to go to the Capitol when he got off the stage at the Ellipse.
Folks, that's not news. We've known that now a long time. And then two, for the 50th time tonight, no weapons, no knives, no guns, no rifles were found in the crowd. Nobody.
The Secret
Zip,
Service
nada.
detail was equally determined to not let him go. That led to a heated argument with the detail that delayed the departure of the motorcade to the White House. We have evidence from multiple sources regarding an angry exchange in the presidential SUV, including testimony we will disclose today from two witnesses who confirmed that a confrontation occurred. The first witness is a former White House employee with national security responsibilities. After seeing the initial violence at the Capitol on TV, the individual went to see Tony Ornato, the deputy chief of staff in his office. Mr. Ornato was there with Bobby Engel, the president's lead Secret Service agent. This employee told us that Mr. Ornato said that the president was, quote, irate when Mr. Engel refused to drive him to the Capitol. Mr. Engel did not refute what Mr. Ornato said. The second witness is retired Sergeant Mark Robinson of the D.C. Police Department, who was assigned to the president's motorcade that day. He sat in the lead vehicle with a Secret Service agent responsible for the motorcade, also called the TS agent. Here's how Sergeant Robinson remembered the exchange.
Was there any description of what was occurring in the car?
No, the only description I received was that the president was upset and that was adamant about going to the Capitol, and there was a heated discussion about that.
And when you say heated, is that your word or is that the word that was described by the TS agent?
No, word described by the TS agent, meaning that the president was upset, and he was saying there was a heated argument or discussion about going to the Capitol.
About how many times would you say you've been part of that motorcade with the president?
Probably over 100 times.
And in that 100 times, have you ever witnessed another discussion of an argument or heated discussion with the president where the president was contradicting where he was supposed to go or what the Secret Service believed was safe?
No.
Like other witnesses, Sergeant Robinson also testified that he was aware that individuals in the crowd were armed.
Yes, I believe he was on Special Events Channel, and I was monitoring the traffic, and so I can hear some of the units pointing out to individuals that there were individuals along Constitution Avenue that were armed, that were up in the trees, and I can hear the units responding to those individuals. And so there's always a concern when there's a protest in the area.
And like other witnesses, Sergeant Robinson told us that the president still wanted to travel to the Capitol, even after returning to the White House.
So at the end of the speech, what was the plan supposed to be?
So at the end of the speech, we do know that while inside the limo, the president was still adamant about going to the Capitol. That's being relayed to me by the TS agent. And so we did part the ellipse and we responded back to the White House. However, the motorcade, the POTUS motorcade was placed on standby. And so we were told to stand by on West Exec until they confirmed whether or not the president was going to.
All right, so I've let this go on quite some time without interrupting it. Let's assume for the sake of the argument that Trump wanted to go to the Capitol. I mean, they make it sound like he was going to be, go in there, right? Like Mel Gibson in Braveheart, freedom, and that they're going to storm the Capitol, and he's going to do what? What's he going to do? His plan, we're gonna during a break, we'll bring it up again. We brought it up every live stream because the plan was to object to the certification. You don't go to all the trouble of getting electors, alternate electors from 6-7 states, getting them there, showing up so that you can object to the election and make the certification process take a whole week, and then leave it up to a bunch of people with zip ties and Viking helmets. This is idiocy. I don't know what the point of this is.
To the Capitol.
It's not true, by the way, but even if it was, what does it get them?
I would just estimate maybe 45 minutes to an hour, waiting for Secret Service to make that decision.
The motorcade waited at the White House for more than 45 minutes before being released. The committee is also aware that accounts of the angry confrontation in the presidential SUV have circulated widely among the Secret Service since January 6th. Recent disclosures have also caused the committee to subpoena yet further information from the Secret Service, which we've begun to receive and will continue to assess. The committee is also aware that certain Secret Service witnesses have now retained new private counsel. We anticipate further testimony under oath and other new information in the coming weeks. After the Secret Service refused to take
So what you need to understand from that, folks, is that now that people are coming before the committee and getting book deals and getting famous, the people are hiring lawyers who want to get book deals and get famous. That's why you have show trials, folks. All right? You think you can't bring people out of the woodwork? I mean,
Trump to the Capitol,
it's just silly.
He returned to the White House. What you see on the screen is a photo of him inside the Oval Office immediately after he returned from the rally, still wearing his overcoat. A White House employee informed the president as soon as he returned to the Oval about the riot at the Capitol. Let me repeat that. Within 15 minutes of leaving the stage, President Trump knew that the Capitol was besieged and under attack. At 1:25, President Trump went to the private dining room off the Oval Office. From 1:25 until 4 o'clock, the president stayed in his dining room. Just to give you a sense of where the dining room is situated in the West Wing,
Nobody
let's
cares.
take a look at this floor plan.
No, we don't need to. Please
The dining
don't.
room is connected to the Oval Office by a short hallway. Witnesses told us that on January 6th, President Trump sat in his usual spot, at the head of the table, facing a television hanging on the wall. We know from the employee that the TV was tuned to Fox News all afternoon. Here you can see Fox News on the TV showing coverage of the joint session that was airing that day at 1:25.
Now, folks, I've been trying to think through all this, what was probably actually going through the president's head. My guess is he was probably extremely dejected because he realized, if he was watching this, he realized that the rioters, that he'd either been had because it's a false flag operation and they've been infiltrated by feds, but he certainly realized at this point his Green Bay sweep plan to keep the certification from happening on various different days and to continue and get television. He realized that wasn't going to happen at this point in all likelihood. That'd be my best guess.
The witnesses confirmed that President Trump was in the dining room with the TV on for more than 2.5 hours. There was no official record of what President Trump did while in the dining room. On the screen is the presidential call log from January 6th. As you can see, there's no official record of President Trump receiving or placing a call between 11:06 and 6:54 p.m. As to what the president was doing that afternoon, the presidential daily diary is also silent. It contains no information from the period between 1:21 p.m. and 4:03 p.m. There are also no photos of President Trump during this critical period between 1:21 in the Oval Office and when he went outside to the Rose Garden after 4 o'clock.
I'm not sure what this is
The
proving.
chief White House
but-
photographer wanted to take pictures because it was, in her words, very important for his archives and for history. But she was told, quote, no photographs. Despite the lack of photos or an official record, we've learned what President Trump was doing while he was watching TV in the dining room.
What was he doing?
But before we get into that, it's important to understand what he never did that day. Let's watch.
So are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Defense that day?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Attorney General of the United States that day?
No.
Are you aware of any phone call by the President of the United States to the Secretary of Homeland Security that day?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Did you ever hear the Vice President, or excuse me, the President
No.
ask for the National
No.
Guard? Did you ever hear the President ask for law enforcement response?
No.
So, as somebody who works in the national security space and with the National Security Council, if there were going to be troops present or called up for a rally in Washington, D.C., for example, is that something that you would have been aware of?
Yeah, I would have.
Do you know if you asked anybody to...
So they're piling on here. I made this point the very first hearing. That doesn't mean he didn't have other people do it, folks. He's allowed to delegate. This doesn't get you anything.
reach out
That's why
to
you have show
any of
trials
those
with
that
no
we just listed off,
cross-examination.
National Guard, DOD, FBI, Homeland Security, Secret Service, Mayor Bowser, the Capitol Police about the situation in the Capitol?
I am not aware of any of those requests. No, sir.
We have confirmed in numerous interviews with senior law enforcement and military leaders, Vice President Pence's staff and D.C. government officials. None of them, not one, heard from President Trump that day. He did not call to issue orders. He did not call to offer assistance. This week we received additional testimony from yet another witness about why the president didn't make any efforts to quell the attack.
Oh, this could be interesting.
The former White House employee with national security responsibilities told us about a conversation with senior advisor Eric Hirschman and Pat Cipollone, the top White House lawyer. This conversation was about a pending call from the Pentagon seeking to coordinate on the response to the attack. Mr. Hirschman turned to Mr. Cipollone and said, the president didn't want to do anything. And so Mr. Cipollone had to take the call himself. So if President Trump wasn't calling law enforcement or military leaders, what did President Trump spend his time doing that afternoon while he first settled into the dining room? He was calling senators to encourage them to delay or object to the certification. Here's Kayleigh McEnany, his press secretary, to explain.
All right, then it says back there, and he wants list of senators. And then he's calling them one by one. Do you know which ones he called?
To the best of my recollection, no. As I say in my notes, he wanted a list of the senators, and I left him at that point.
So again, that was my best guess about what he'd be doing. Is he'd be concerned that breaching the Capitol means that the objection plan that he put in forth the last days to keep Biden from getting certified had been nixed, and he was calling people to try to get it going again. That's consistent with what I would assume was happening.
We do
And
not
again,
yet-
I'm guessing he delegated to other people. I mean, again, folks, you can't have it both ways with Trump. You can't say that he's aloof and he's not really doing all rolling up sleeves doing the work, and then say, well, he should have gotten on there and gotten the phone like a secretary. I mean, he has other people. He asked them to do it. I'm sure that they were doing it.
Precisely which senators President Trump was calling. But we do know from Rudy Giuliani's phone records that President Trump also called him at 1:39, after he had been told that the riot was underway at the Capitol. Mr. Giuliani was President Trump's lead election attorney. According to the phone records, the president's call with him lasted approximately 4 minutes. Recall that Fox News was on in the dining room. Let's take a look at what was airing as this call was ending.
The president, as we all saw, fired this crowd up. They've all, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or more, have gone down to the Capitol or elsewhere in the city, and they're very upset. Now, I jumped down as soon as we heard the news that Brett gave you about Mike Pence. I started talking to these people. I said, what do you think? One woman, an Air Force veteran from Missouri, said she was, quote, disgusted to hear that news and that it was his duty to do something. And I told her, I said, there's nothing in the Constitution unilaterally that Vice President Pence could do. She said, that doesn't matter. He should have fought for Trump.
At 1:49, here's what was happening at the Capitol with President Trump's fired up supporters.
We're going to give riot warning. We're going to try to get compliance, but this is now effectively a riot.
49 hours declaring it a riot.
What did President Trump do at 1:49 as the DC police at the same time were declaring a riot at the Capitol? As you can see on the screen, he tweeted out a link to the recording of his ellipse speech. This was the same speech in which he knowingly sent an armed mob to the Capitol. But President Trump made no comment about the lawlessness and the violence. I yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
The next action President Trump took was to tweet at 2:24 p.m. What happened during the 35 minutes between his last tweet at 1:49 and 2:24? His staff repeatedly came into the room to see him and plead that he make a strong public statement condemning the violence and instructing the mob to leave the Capitol. He did not relent until after 4 o'clock when he went out to go to the Rose Garden to film his now infamous go home message. Pat Cipollone was a top White House lawyer. Here's what he told us about his reaction to seeing the violence and his advice throughout the afternoon.
When did you first realize that there was actual violence or rioting?
I first realized that it may have been on television, or it may have been Tony, or it may have been Bill, but I found out that people were, they weren't in the Capitol yet, but they were, and then I started watching it, and, then I was aware.
What specifically did you think needed to be done?
I think I was pretty clear there needed to be an immediate and forceful response statement, public statement, that people need to leave the Capitol now.
My question's exactly that. It sounds like...
Again, folks, this isn't setting up enough of dereliction of duty. That's Cipollone's opinion, but his opinion doesn't control. If reasonable people can differ, there's no dereliction of duty.
From the very onset of violence at the Capitol, at around 2 o'clock, they're pushing for a strong statement that people should leave the Capitol. Is that right?
I was, and others were as well.
Pat, you said that you expressed your opinion forcefully. Could you tell us exactly how you did that?
Yeah, I can't, don't have, I have to, on the privilege issue, I can't talk about conversations with the president, but I can generically say that I said, people need to be told, there needs to be a public announcement fast that they need to leave the Capitol.
And Pat, could you let us know approximately when you said that?
Approximately when? Almost immediately after I found out people were getting into the Capitol or approaching the Capitol in a way that was violent.
Do you remember any discussion with Mark Meadows with respect to his view that the president didn't want to do anything, was somehow resistant to wanting to say something along the lines that he suggests?
And it's not just to be clear, many people suggested it. Not just me, many people felt the same way. I'm sure I had conversations with Mark about this during the course of the day and expressed my opinion very forcefully that this needs to be done.
So your advice was tell people to leave the Capitol, and it took
over 2 hours, when there were subsequent statements made, tweets put forth, that in your view were insufficient, did you continue, Mr. Cipollone, throughout the period of time up until 4/17, continue, you and others, to push for a stronger statement?
Yes.
Were you joined in that effort by Ivanka Trump?
Yes.
Eric Hirschman?
Yes.
By Mark Meadows?
Yes.
White House counsel's office wanted there to be a
Cassidy
strong
Hutchinson.
statement out to
They always go back to
condemn
her.
the rioters. I'm confident in that. I'm confident that Ivanka Trump wanted there to be a strong statement to condemn the rioters. I don't know the private conversation she had with Mr. Trump, but I remember when she came to the office one time with White House counsel's office, when she came to the chief of staff's office with White House counsel's office, she was talking about the speech later that day and trying to get her dad on board with saying something that was more direct than he had wanted to at the time and throughout the afternoon.
And I think Mark also I remember him getting Ivanka involved because it's like, get Ivanka down here because he thought that would be important. I don't think Jared was there in the morning, but I think he came later. I remember thinking it was important to get him in there too. And of course, Pat Philbin, was expressing the same things. I mean, Pat Philbin, was very, as I said, I don't think there was one of these meetings where there might have been.
I'm not really sure why they're dragging this on. I mean, I think they've established that certainly a lot of people in Trump's orbit thought that he should do something. Again, under the business judgment rule, you can't have dereliction of duty if reasonable people could differ about what you're taking. What you need, and because there's no cross-examination here, we won't have it, is what other people were telling him and anybody that thought maybe he should let law enforcement handle it. But
For the most part, I remember
hopefully
both of
they'll
us
move on to another
going
point here
down
soon.
together, going back, getting on phone calls. He was also very clearly expressing this view.
Pat Cipollone and Cassidy Hutchinson, an aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, also told us about the Hang Mike Pence chants. As you will see, Mr. Cipollone recalled conversations about those chants in the West Wing, but he relied on executive privilege to maintain confidentiality over his and others' direct communications with the president. Although Mr. Cipollone was unwilling to provide more detail, Ms. Hutchison provided more explicit information, filling in those blanks. See that for yourself.
It wasn't until Mark hung up the phone, handed it back to me.
This is a repeat. We've seen this.
A couple minutes later, him and Pat came back, possibly Eric Hirschman too. I'm pretty sure Eric Hirschman was there. But I'm confident it was Pat that was there. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more. Briefly stepped into Mark's office.
Now, again, it doesn't prove anything. Even assuming they said that, they're assuming that what Trump meant was Mike Pence deserves to be hanged. I don't hear that. What I hear is Mike Pence deserves them chanting and being angry at him, and they're not going to hang him, but they deserve to be angry at him because he didn't do his job, right? But again, they've heard this. This is not new information. We've played this before. In no trial, and I've been practicing law for 25 years, have I ever been able to try a case and go, oh, let me play video of testimony we had 2 weeks ago that I really like. Let's bring that up again. I mean, this is just silly, folks.
Discussion at any point during the day about rioters at the Capitol chanting, hang Mike Pence.
Yes, I remember hearing about that. Yes. I don't know if I observed that myself on TV yet.
I'm just curious, I understand the privilege line you've drawn, but do you remember what you can share with us about the discussion about those chants, the hang Mike Pence chants?
Oh.
I can tell you my view of that.
Yeah, please.
My view of that is outrageous. And for anyone to suggest such a thing as the Vice President of the United States, for people in that crowd to be chanting that, I thought it was terrible. I thought it was outrageous and wrong, and I expressed that very clearly.
With respect to the conversations with Mr. Meadows, though, did you specifically raise a concern over the vice president with him, and how did he respond?
I believe I raised a concern about the vice president, and I again, the nature of his response, without recalling exactly, was he, people were doing all that they could.
And what about the president? Did he indicate whether he thought the president was doing what needed to be done to protect the vice president?
What could he do?
Just sir, that
Call for production. Yeah. Okay. I'm being sharp on it.
I see.
In addition, Mr. Cipollone testified that it would have been feasible, as commentators on television were suggesting, for President Trump to immediately appear at the podium in the press room to address the nation.
Would it have been possible at any moment for the president to walk down to the podium in the briefing and talk to the nation at any time between when you first gave him that advice at 2 o'clock and 4:17 when the video statement? Would that have been possible?
Would it have been possible?
Yes.
Yes, it would have been possible.
We just heard Mr. Cipollone say that President Trump could have gone to the press briefing room to issue a statement at any moment. To give you a sense of just how easy that would have been, let's take a look at a map of the West Wing. As we saw earlier...
All right, I hate to interrupt this, folks. Folks, people are in a riot, and you think they're going to tune in to Fox News to see what's going on in the White House press room? This is just silly, folks.
The president's private dining room is at the bottom of the map. The press briefing room is at the top, highlighted in blue. And the Rose Garden, where the president ultimately filmed his Go Home video, is on the right next to the Oval Office, and that's highlighted in green. Ms. Matthews, how quickly could the president have gotten on camera in the press briefing room to deliver a statement to the nation?
So as you outlined, it would take probably less than 60 seconds from the Oval Office dining room over to the press briefing room. And for folks that might not know, the briefing room is the room that you see the White House press secretary do briefings from, with the podium and the blue backdrop. And there's a camera that is on in there at all times. And so if the president had wanted to make a statement and address the American people, he could have been on camera almost instantly. And conversely,
this is the kind of thing that if we're a real trial, we would have just stipulated that he could have done a lot of things. We'll stipulate to it. Let's move on. But instead, we have to go through
White House press corps has offices that are located directly behind the briefing room. And so if he had wanted to make an address from the Oval Office, we could have assembled the White House press corps probably in a matter of minutes to get them into the Oval for him to do an on-camera address.
Thank you. Other witnesses have given us their views on that question. For example, General Keith Kellogg told us that some staff were concerned that a live appearance by the president at the microphones at that moment could actually make matters worse. He told us he recommended against doing a press conference because during his 4 years in the Trump administration, quote, there wasn't a single clean press conference we had had. President Trump's advisors knew his state of mind at that moment, and they were worried about what he would say in unscripted comments. I yield to the gentlewoman from Virginia.
Thank you.
I'm not really sure what that was supposed to be
by 2 o'clock,
about,
multiple staff members in the White House recognized that a serious situation was underway at the Capitol. Personally, I recall being evacuated from the House office building where we're sitting before this time. And it was due to the discovery of 2 pipe bombs in nearby buildings. Ms. Matthews.
There's never been any connection to Trump, his supporters, and any pipe bombs, folks.
At the same time, you were watching
In fact, to this date, we still haven't heard anything about the pipe bombs.
Unfold on television and social media with colleagues, including with Ben Williamson, a senior aide to Mark Meadows and the acting director of communications. You told us that before President Trump sent his next tweet at 2:24, Mr. Williamson got up to go see Mr. Meadows, and you got up to go see Kayleigh McEnany. Why did you both do that?
So Ben and I were watching the coverage unfold from one of the offices in the West Wing, and we both recognized that the situation was escalating, and it was escalating quickly, and that the president needed to be out there immediately to tell these people to go home and condemn the violence that we were seeing. So I told him that I was going to make that recommendation to Kaylee, and he said he was going to make the same recommendation to the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows.
Thank you. And one of your colleagues in the press office, Judd Deere, told us he also went to see Ms. McEnany at that time. Let's hear what he said about this critical period of time, right as the rioters were getting into the Capitol.
And why did you think it was necessary to say something?
Well, I mean, it appears that individuals are storming the U.S. Capitol building. They also appear to be supporters of Donald Trump who may have been in attendance at the rally. We're going to need to say something.
And did you have a view as to what should be said by the White House?
If I recall, I told Kaylee that I thought that we needed to encourage individuals to stop, to respect law enforcement, and to go home.
So again, I'm not sure how much longer they're going to keep up this litany. I mean, so far we've heard a bunch of people, almost all underlings. We haven't heard any high-level people, by the way, disagree with him. That's not dereliction of duty. And one other quick thing, folks, they have now been going for an hour and 5 minutes. Typically, they've been stopping hour on the hour when Thompson was running this thing. So it might be a clue that they're going to go long. I hope not, but we'll see.
Although President Trump was aware of the ongoing riot, he did not take any immediate action to address the lawlessness. Instead, at 2:03, he called Rudy Giuliani again, and that call lasted for over 8 minutes. Moments later, at 2:13, rioters broke into the Capitol itself. One of the Proud Boys charged with seditious conspiracy, Dominic Pezzola, used an officer's shield to smash a window, and rioters flooded into the building.
Now, that undoubtedly happened. We also know there's a lot of video showing that a lot of people were just let in by the Capitol officers. Again, this is effective. It's not very, it's not in good faith, but it's effective.
As rioters were entering the building, the Secret Service held Vice President Pence in his office right off the Senate chamber for 13 minutes as they worked to clear a safe path to a secure location. Now listen to some of that radio traffic and see what they were seeing as the protesters got just feet away from where the Vice President was holding.
Oh, they got through the building. Hold. Or that door up. Remember, we need to move now. Copy. If we lose any more time, we may lose the ability to leave. So if we're going to leave, we need to do it now.
They've gained access to the second floor, and I've got public about 5 feet from me down here below.
Good copy. They are on the second floor, moving in now. We may want to consider getting out and leaving now. Copy.
Will we encounter the people once we make our way?
Repeat.
Encounter any individuals if we made our way to the.
There's 6 officers between us and the people that are 5 to 10 feet away from me.
Stand by. I'm going down to evaluate. Go ahead. We have a clear spot if we move quickly. We got smoke downstairs set by unknown smoke set downstairs by the protesters.
Is that route compromised?
We have this insecure. However, we will bypass some protesters that are being contained. There is smoke, unknown what kind of smoke it is. Copy.
Clear, we're coming out now. All right, make a way.
All right, now this is going to be where they say that they got within 40 feet of Pence. And they've shown this video before, folks. We've seen it before. Oh, they didn't show it. Okay, wow.
The President's National Security Council staff was listening to these developments and tracking them in real time. On the screen, you can see excerpts from the chat logs among the President's National Security Council staff. At 2:13, the staff learned that the rioters were kicking in the windows at the Capitol. 3 minutes later, the staff said the Vice President was being pulled, which meant agents evacuated him from the Senate floor. At 2:24, the staff noted that the Secret Service agents at the Capitol did not, quote, sound good right now. Earlier, you heard from a security professional who had been working in the White House complex on January 6th, with access to relevant information and a responsibility to report to national security officials.
Oh boy, here we go with the guy
We
who's...
asked this person, what was meant by the comment that the Secret Service agents did not, quote, sound good right now?
Now, folks, this would be highly objectionable in a court of law. It's calls for speculation. This person has no idea what somebody on a radio talking at that point meant. And again, the reason they brought this person forward, this wasn't somebody who newly came. This is somebody they picked out. They decided to put a computer voiceover. This is all show.
The following clip of that testimony, which has been modified to protect the individual's identity, the professional discusses what they heard from listening to the incoming radio traffic that
This is
day.
pathetic.
Okay, that last entry in the speech asserts the Capitol does not sound good right now.
Correct.
What's that mean?
The members of the BP detail at this time were starting to fear for their own lives. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of very personal calls over the radio. So it was disturbing. I don't like talking about it, but there were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth.
Oh, jeez.
For whatever the reason was on the ground, the BP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
And did you hear that over the radio? Okay. What was the response by the agents Secret Service agents who were there?
Everybody kept saying, at that point it was just reassurances or I think there were discussions of reinforcements coming, but again, it was just chaos. They were just yelling.
Obviously, to me, it's disturbing, but what prompted you to put it into an entry? As it states there, service to the
If
council.
they're running out of options and they're getting nervous, it sounds like that we came very close to either service having to use legal options or worse. Like at that point, I don't know. Is the BP compromised? Is the detail I don't know. Like we didn't have visibility, but it doesn't. If they're screaming and saying things like say goodbye to the family, like the floor needs to know this is going to on a whole other level soon.
That's just disgusting.
As this next video shows, the rioters' anger was focused primarily on Vice President Mike Pence.
This woman comes up to the side of us and she says, Pence folded. So it was kind of like, okay, well, in my mind, I was thinking, well, that's it, Well, my son-in-law looks at me and he says, I want to go in.
What percentage of the crowd is going to the Capitol?
100%. It is spread like wildfire that Pence has.
Well, it can't be 100%, because if it's 100%, if we know that they had firearms and weapons when they were at the Ellipse, if 100% went to the Capitol when they were arrested, we would have found knives and firearms, but we didn't. So it can't be 100%.
Us, and everybody's marching on the Capitol. All 1 million of us. It's insane.
Did people appear angry as you were walking to the Capitol?
Yeah, a lot of people seem like they're very upset.
Tell us some of the things they were saying.
This is the fella that appeared at the last hearing. He's not a very credible person. Allegedly, he's a Trump supporter, but now thinks he's been lied to. So he's turned against Trump.
If you recall.
Oh, they were saying all types. People were screaming all types of stuff. They were mad that Vice President Pence was going to accept the electorals. It was a little. If you could think it up, you were hearing it.
I believe that Vice President Pence was going to certify the electoral votes or not certify them, but I guess that's just changed, correct? And it's a very big disappointment. I think there's several 100,000 people here that are very disappointed.
President Trump did not try to calm his thousands of disappointed supporters. Instead, at almost the same moment violence was getting completely out of hand, Donald Trump sent his 224 tweet. The president said, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. Despite knowing the Capitol had been breached and the mob was in the building, President Trump called Mike Pence a coward and placed all the blame on him for not stopping the certification. He put a target on his own vice president's back. Mr. Pottinger and Ms. Matthews, when we ask you about your reaction to seeing the 224 tweet in real time, you both used the same imagery to describe it. President Trump was adding fuel to the fire. Mr. Pottinger, you made the decision to resign after seeing this tweet. Can you please tell us why?
Yes. So that was pretty soon after or shortly before I'd gotten back to the White House. I'd come from off-site. I began to see for the first time those images on TV of the chaos that was unfolding at the Capitol.
So, folks, they've been going for an hour and 15 minutes. I don't know why they haven't stopped. Typically, they've been stopping at an hour. So it looks like we're about 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 40 minutes tonight, which is regrettable because I'm not feeling well and I really we need to stop this. But, folks, you just impeached your own witness. This is like the 5th or 6th or 7th time they've done this. Okay, you've got this guy, he's a Republican, he's a former Trump guy, he's just here, he's in good faith, and here you go, you give him a chance to impeach himself. Well, you resigned. Oh, so that's why you're here, because you don't agree with what Trump did. Well, you're not a credible witness at that point.
One of my aides handed me a sheet of paper that contained the tweet that you just read. I read it and was quite disturbed by it. I was disturbed and worried to see that the president was attacking Vice President Pence for doing his constitutional duty. So the tweet looked to me like the opposite of what we really needed at that moment, which was a de-escalation. And that's why I had said earlier that it looked like fuel being poured on the fire. So that was the moment that I decided that I was going to resign, that would be my last day at the White House. I simply didn't want to be associated with the events that were unfolding on the Capitol.
Thank you. And Ms. Matthews, what was your reaction to the president's tweet about Vice President Pence?
So it was obvious that the situation at the Capitol was violent and escalating quickly. And so I thought that the tweet about the vice president was the last thing that was needed in that moment. And I remember thinking that this was going to be bad for him to tweet this because it was essentially him giving the green light to these people, telling them that what they were doing at the steps of the Capitol and entering the Capitol was okay, that they were justified in their anger. And he shouldn't have been doing that. He should have been telling these people to go home and to leave and to condemn the violence that we were seeing. And I'm someone who has worked with him. You know, I worked on the campaign, traveled all around the country, going to countless rallies with him, and I've seen the impact that his words have on his supporters. They truly latch on to every word and every tweet that he says, and so I think that in that moment, for him to tweet out the message about...
So, in all these other places you went, how many people erupted in violence? How about 0? Which would lead credence to the fact that there's a false flag problem here, or there was infiltration.
Pence, it was him pouring gasoline on the fire and making it much worse.
In your opinion.
Thank you both. And let's watch what others also told us about their reactions to
Oh,
this
here we go.
tweet.
More people that didn't like it.
I don't remember when exactly I heard about that tweet, but my reaction to it is that's a terrible tweet, and I disagreed with the sentiment, and I thought it was wrong. What was your reaction when you saw that tweet?
Extremely unhelpful.
Why?
It wasn't the message that we needed at that time. It wasn't going to. The scenes at the U.S. Capitol were only getting worse at that point. This was not going to help that.
It's already going to make it worse.
Certainly.
Ms. Hutchinson, what was your reaction when you saw this tweet?
As a staffer that works
Oh boy.
to always represent
She
the
said this here.
administration
This is
to the best of my ability.
all right, folks. This is classic impeaching your own witness. Now, the other people didn't like it, but you can still see. All right. Watch how far she goes. She goes head in over her skis to say how terrible Trump is for this tweet. Listen to this. This is classic amateur hour by the committee.
To showcase the good things that he had done for the country. I remember feeling frustrated, disappointed, and really, it felt personal. I was really sad. As an American, I was disgusted. It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie.
Ooh, boom. Not very helpful for the committee. Not helpful.
As you will see, at 2:26, the vice president had to be evacuated to safety a second time and came within 40 feet of the rioters. The attack escalated quickly right after the tweet.
All right, a couple things here real quick, folks. We're having to take their word that wasn't, those timestamps are correct. I don't believe that for 1 second because nothing this committee has ever done has been honest. But, folks, if it is true that the timing is right and they're not lying to us, which it's assuming a lot, but if it is true, that is very, very effective. It's one of the most effective things they've done so far. Doesn't mean dereliction of duty, of course, but it's effective.
During this chaos, what did President Trump do at that point? He went back to calling senators to try to further delay the electoral count. While the vice president was being evacuated from the Senate, President Trump called Senator Tommy Tuberville, one of his strongest supporters in the Senate. As Senator Tuberville later recalled, he had to end the call so that he could evacuate the Senate chamber himself. Let's listen.
He didn't call my phone, called somebody else, and they handed it to me, and I basically told him, I said, Mr. President, we're not doing much work here right now because they just took our vice president out, and matter of fact, I'm going to have to hang up on you. I've got to leave.
Senator Josh Hawley also had to flee. Earlier that afternoon, before the joint session started, he walked across the east front of the Capitol. As you can see in this photo, he raised his fist in solidarity with the protesters already amassing at the security gates. We spoke with a Capitol police officer who was out there at the time. She told us that Senator Hawley's gesture riled up the crowd, and it bothered her greatly because he was doing it in a safe space, protected by the officers and the barriers. Later that day,
folks, that is a perfect example of fascism right there. You demean your political opponents, what they do politically, because you disagree with it.
Senator Hawley fled after those protesters he helped to rile up stormed the Capitol. See for yourself.
Zero evidence of Hawley riling up people with a fist. I mean, AOC did this during her fake arrest at the Supreme Court the other day. Did she rile people up? Oh, that's that is kind of funny. I mean, it doesn't prove anything, folks, but you got to give them credit. I mean, don't hate the player, hate the game. It is kind of funny.
Think about what we've seen. Undeniable violence at the Capitol. The vice president being evacuated to safety by the Secret Service. Senators running through the hallways of the Senate to get away from the mob. As the commander-in-chief, President Trump was oath and duty bound to protect the Capitol.
What was he
Senior
supposed to
staff
do? You
understood
still
that.
haven't introduced any evidence of what he's supposed to do.
Do you believe, Jared, that the president has an obligation to ensure a peaceful transfer of power?
Yes.
And do you think the president has an obligation to defend all three branches of our government?
I believe so.
And I assume you also would agree the president has a particular obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
That is one of the president's obligations, correct?
Okay.
No, I mean, I asked what his duty is.
Well, I mean, there's a constitutional duty. What he has, he's the commander-in-chief, and that was that was my biggest issue with him as national security advisor.
Rather than uphold his duty to the Constitution, President Trump allowed the mob to achieve the delay that he hoped would keep him in power. I reserve.
Okay, God, please tell me
Gentleman
we're going on a break.
reserves. I request that those in the hearing room
Okay,
remain
good.
seated
Looks like
until
we're
the
going on a
Capitol
break.
Police have escorted members and witnesses from the room. I now declare the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
All right, let's see if we have time to get to one quick thing.
Vice Chair, Congressman Liz Cheney of Wyoming.
Let's scroll ahead here.
I would check off.
Scroll ahead. Scroll ahead. Scroll ahead. I hope we have some
Political
time.
institutions. Or
Scroll
served
ahead.
both
I think
the House and the Senate on committee staff.
Scroll ahead.
Liz Cheney as the
Okay, yeah,
members
they're
of the
back,
committee
so we're
take
not
their
going to have any
seats.
time. All right, we were.
The committee will be in order. I now recognize the gentleman from Illinois.
We left at the recess just after President Trump's 224 tweet attacking the vice president. By this time, the president had been in his dining room for an hour. I want you to just think of what you would have done if you were in his shoes and had the power to end the violence. You would have immediately and forcefully told the rioters to stop and leave. Like, stop and leave. Done.
All right, folks, we've done this 100 million times, but you can't hear too much. The last person who wanted violence was Donald Trump. The violence interrupts his Green Bay sweep. He sent 6 electors from these swing states to object to the certification. The violence, we know it stopped it in its tracks. So he got nothing. They have yet to explain why the violence helped Trump. And the reason they've yet to explain it is because, A, they don't have to explain anything because the world is what they say it is. And 2, because they just can't help themselves. They're so upset by the quote-unquote violence or whatever that they got to keep coming back to it. So, again,
As you heard, that's
this isn't gonna
exactly
help
what
them.
his senior staff had been urging him to do.
No, we haven't heard from senior staff. We've heard from some senior staff that there was opinion he should do something, but you didn't hear from senior staff. I haven't heard from the cabinet.
Resisted, and he kept resisting for another almost 2 hours. In the meantime, all the president did was post 2 tweets. One at 2:38 and the other at 3:13. One said, quote, "Stay peaceful." The other said, quote, "Remain peaceful." But the president already knew that the mob was attacking the police and had invaded the Capitol. Neither tweet condemned the violence or told the mob to leave the Capitol and disperse. To appreciate how obvious it was that President Trump was not meeting this moment, it's helpful to look at the real-time reactions of his own son, Don Jr., to the first tweet, captured in a series of text messages with Mark Meadows. I'll warn the audience that these messages contain some strong language. As you can see, Don Jr. first texted Mr. Meadows at 2:53. He wrote, "He's got to condemn this shit ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough." Mr. Meadows replied, "I am pushing it hard. I agree." Don Jr. responded, "This is one you go to the mattresses on. They will try to fuck his entire legacy if this if it gets worse. Here's what Don Jr. told us he meant by go to the mattresses.
It's 258 when you say that that Mr. Meadows needs to go to the mattresses on this issue. When you say go to the mattresses, what does that mean?
It's just a reference for going all in. I think it's a Godfather reference.
It is.
Sean Hannity agreed, and he also turned to Mark Meadows for help after the president's second tweet. As you can see, Mr. Hannity texted at 3:31 to say Trump needed to deliver a statement to the nation telling the...
Folks, this is particularly weak. They promised us the moon. We're halfway past into this thing, and this is stuff we've seen before. I've seen this. I have unfortunately live streamed all 8 of these. This is the 8th. We've seen this stuff before. We get it. A lot of people were urging him to do more to get the violence to stop. Nobody wanted the violence, including Trump. The question is, what was he supposed to do, would be my guess.
...to leave the Capitol. Mr. Meadows responded that he was, quote, on it. Don Jr. and Sean Hannity were not the only ones who implored Mr. Meadows to get the president to speak to the nation and tell the mob to leave, to go home. Go home. Throughout the attack, Mr. Meadows received texts from Republican members of Congress, from current and former Trump administration officials.
You know, Kinzinger seems a little unhinged. He wasn't as unhinged the last time he chaired one of these.
They knew President Trump had to speak publicly to get the mob to stop. Let's look at just a few of these text messages. Fox News personality Laura Ingraham said, "The president needs to tell the people in the Capitol to go home." Former Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney urged Mark, he needs to stop this now. Fox News personality Brian Kilmeade said, "Please get him on TV, destroying everything."
Folks, you can see this. He's just reading them. There's nothing new here. There's no new information. We've seen all this stuff before. This was supposed to be a crescendo. It's nothing of the kind.
Not enough. Let's listen to what he said.
I think the question is, did you believe that the tweets were not anything about your advice to the president?
No, I believe more needed to be done. Okay? I believed that a public statement needed to be made.
When you talk about others on the staff thinking more should be done, or thinking that the president needed to tell people to go home, who would you put in that category?
Well, I would put Pat Philbin, Eric Hirschman, overall Mark Meadows, Ivanka, once Jared got there, Jared, General Kellogg. I'm probably missing some, but there's Kaylee, I think, was there, but I don't. Dan Scavino.
And who on the staff did not want people to leave the Capitol?
On the staff?
In the White House, how about?
I can't think of anybody, on that day who didn't want people to get out of the Capitol particularly once.
That's not the question. The question is how to get them out of the Capitol. Trump wanted them out of the Capitol too, and they have yet to establish what they were supposed to do. So they hang Pence. How does that keep Trump in power? So they hang Pelosi. How does that keep Trump in power? Right? So you've got a bunch of people, I think you should do this, I think you should do that. And because you didn't, that's dereliction of duty, which isn't a crime. We started the live stream. We began with that and explained why it's not a crime. But I don't know where they're going with this. Everybody wants the violence to stop. They haven't established why Trump benefited from violence. It's the biggest weakness so far.
I mean,
What about the president?
Yeah.
she said the staff. So I answered.
No, I said in the White House.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought you said who else on the staff. I can't reveal communications, but obviously I think, you know, yeah.
Let's pause on that last statement. Although Pat Cipollone is being careful about executive privilege, there really is no ambiguity about what he said. Almost everybody wanted President Trump to instruct the mob to disperse. President Trump refused. To understand how inadequate the president's tweets were, let's examine his 238 tweet in more detail. For context, here's what was happening at that time.
They broke the glass? Everybody stay down! Get down!
Doors barricaded. There's people flooded the hallways outside. We have no way out.
We were just told that there has been tear gas in the rotunda, and we're being instructed to each of us get gas masks.
We went from a peaceful protest, and this is a very dangerous situation right now. That there are, I'm being told, these protesters on the inside are around both chambers, and there is now tear gas inside the Capitol Rotunda. In fact, members locked in the House are being instructed to put on masks.
Ms. Matthews, after President Trump's tweet about Vice President Pence, you told us you spoke to, immediately you spoke to Kayleigh McEnany. What did you tell her, and where did she go afterwards?
After the tweet about the vice president, I found Kayleigh and told her that I thought the president needed to immediately send out a tweet that condemned the violence that we were seeing, and that there needed to be a call to action to tell these people to leave the Capitol. And she agreed and walked over to the Oval dining room to find the president.
We interviewed Ms. McEnany and others who were in the dining room with the president, urging him to put out a statement. Ms. Matthews, Ms. McEnany told us she came right back to the press office after meeting with the president about this particular tweet. What did she tell you about what happened in that dining room?
When she got back, she told me that a tweet had been sent out, and I told her that I thought the tweet did not go far enough, that I thought there needed to be a call to action and he needed to condemn the violence. And we were in a room full of people, but people weren't paying attention, and so she looked directly at me and in a hushed tone shared with me that the president did not want to include any sort of mention of peace in that tweet, and that it took some convincing on their part, those who were in the room. And she said that there was a back and forth going over different phrases to find something that he was comfortable with. And it wasn't until Ivanka Trump suggested the phrase "stay peaceful" that he finally agreed to include it.
The president resisted writing "stay peaceful" in a tweet. He told Mark Meadows that the rioters were doing what they should be doing, and the rioters understood they were doing what President Trump wanted them to do.
That's a flub. The testimony was he resisted writing peaceful, and eventually, based on his daughter, he agreed to say "stay peaceful." Now, again, it's not a huge deal, but, this is important, right? And, again, I don't know what any of this means. I mean, who knows what was in his head? That's why you don't have show trials. Now we're reading his mind.
President Trump's message was heard clearly by Stop the Steal organizer Ali Alexander. At 2:38, he told another organizer, quote, "POTUS is not ignorant of what his words would do." Rioters storming the Capitol also heard President Trump's message. In this video, you'll see surveillance footage from the rotunda that shows a group of Oath Keepers, including Jessica Watkins, who's been charged with seditious conspiracy. You'll hear her walkie-talkie communications with others as they share intelligence and communicate about President Trump's 238 tweet in real time.
Now, folks, real quick on seditious conspiracy. So the way this went down, they started, trying to politically persecute people that had been there on January 6th. After about a year of them doing that, okay? So earlier this year, a lot of us were tweeting and pointing out, hey, you keep saying it's a coup and insurrection. No one's been charged with sedition or a coup. And then all of a sudden, magically, the Department of Justice started to prosecute people like this woman he just referenced. Okay? This is nothing but a show trial. It's a sham. And Kinzinger, thank God he won't be in Congress after this, and Liz Cheney likely won't be either. But this is a disgrace.
In the audience, that this clip also contains strong language.
CNN just said that they evacuated all members of Congress into a safety room.
There's no safe place in the United States for any of these motherfuckers right now, let me tell you.
I hope they understand that we are not joking around.
Military Principle 105.
Folks, in a country of 330 million people, you can get people that will think and say just about anything.
Military Principle 105. Cave means grave.
Trump just tweeted, please support our Capitol Police. They are on our side. Do not harm them.
That's saying a lot by what he didn't say. He didn't say not to do anything to the congressman.
Well, he did not ask them to stay.
You see, they think this is helping them. They think, oh, see, this is helping him. All right, see, they're all fired up and they're crazy. But see, it just goes to show probably Trump's point, which is, look, no matter what I say, there's going to be some, opposite reaction that I can't control. These people are out of control. They're screwing up my Green Bay sweep. There's nothing I can do. And all these people who aren't the president of the United States don't know what they're talking about. This isn't particularly helpful to me. It just shows that Trump couldn't do anything. That, as we said earlier in the live stream, a riot is just that. It's a riot. It can't be controlled.
Stand by the Capitol Police. They are on our side, and they are good people. So it's getting real down there. I got it on TV, and it's looking pretty friggin' radical to me. CNN said that Trump has egged this on, that he is egging it on, and that he is watching the country burn 2 weeks before he leaves office. He is not leaving office. I don't give a shit what they say.
We are in the mezzanine. We are in the main dome right now. We are rocking it. They're throwing grenades. They're freaking shooting people with paintballs, but we're in here.
Be safe, be safe. God bless and Godspeed, and keep going.
Get it, Jess. Do your shit. This is what we fucking lived up for. Everything we fucking trained for.
Took over the Capitol. Overran the Capitol. We're in the fucking Capitol, bro.
We've now seen how President Trump's supporters reacted to his tweets. Mr. Pottinger, you told us that you consider the tweets sent to this point to be, quote, wholly inadequate given the urgency of the crisis. What, in your view, would have been needed?
Now, folks, this is just classic. So you bring somebody in who you know is a partisan hack and that disagrees and hates Trump, and then you say, what do you think he could have done? Now, it's hindsight. So, of course, well, I don't know. Let me think of 1,000 things that he could have done and didn't do, and I'll just list those for you, right? Another way to say that is, imagine if every day you were videoed and somebody went back a year later and watched you do your job and said, what could you have done to make your job go better that day? I mean, this is why you don't have show trials, because people can abuse them. And people like the January 6th committee, that's all they do is abuse 24/7, 365. Nothing to see.
Insufficient. I think what you could count me among those who was hoping to see an unequivocal, strong statement clearing out the Capitol, telling people to stand down, leave, go home. I think that's what we were hoping for.
And again, ironically, if Trump could have controlled the crowd, he definitely would have done that. Because again, when I finish this, when they stop, and it looks like, folks, they're going to go more than 2 hours, unfortunately, because we're there an hour and 45 minutes in now, and they don't look anywhere near ready to close. The first 6 they did 2 hours. It looks like they're going to do more. But I'm going to bring up the Green Bay sweep and show you and prove to you why Trump didn't want violence.
So something a lot more kind of definitive and not ambiguous, because he has that power over his folks. Ms. Matthews, you told us about a colleague who said during the attack that the president should not condemn the violence. Can you please tell us about that moment and your reaction?
Yes, so a conversation started in the press office after the president sent out those 2 tweets that I deemed were insufficient. And a colleague suggested that the president shouldn't condemn the violence because they thought it would
that I deemed insufficient. Wow. Unbelievable.
Quote, handing a win to the media.
who is this person? I mean, who is she? You're talking about the president of the United States, and she deemed them insufficient. Again, this is the type of person who shows up and comes out of the woodwork in show trials. This is why you don't have them.
To condemn his
She
supporters.
just impeached herself.
And I disagreed. I thought that we should condemn the violence and condemn it unequivocally. And I thought that he needed to include a call to action and to tell these people to go home. And a debate ensued over it. And I became visibly frustrated, and my colleagues were well aware of that. And I couldn't believe that we were arguing over this in the middle of the West Wing, talking about the politics of a tweet, being concerned.
I mean,
with,
I can't. I wonder where they found her. I mean, when they interviewed her, do you think they weren't like, oh my God, this is a live one. We got to put her on live TV and in prime time.
handing
Wow.
the media when
She
when
is
we
full of
had just
herself.
watched all
Goodness.
of that violence unfold at the Capitol. And so I motioned up at the TV and I said, do you think it looks like we're effing winning? Because I don't think it does. And I again reiterated that I thought that the president needed to condemn the violence because it didn't matter if it was coming from the left or the right, that you should condemn violence 100% of the time.
We've heard this evening how everyone in the president's orbit was pushing him to do more, to tell the mob to leave the Capitol. One of those people was Republican leader Kevin McCarthy. He managed to get the president on the phone and told him to call off his supporters. As you will hear, the president refused, and so Leader McCarthy reached out for help to Ivanka Trump, who was at the White House, and Jared Kushner, who that afternoon had just arrived back on a flight from the Middle East.
So at some point in the afternoon, Mr. McCarthy placed a phone call to Mr. Scavino's desk line, and it was transferred to the president. Is that correct?
That's generally what I recall.
Okay. Were you involved in transferring that call?
Yes.
Okay. Where was the president at the time that he took that call?
He was in the dining room.
Would you personally reach out to the president for more support?
I've already talked to the president. I called him. I think we need to make a statement, make sure that we can calm individuals down.
Did Mr. McCarthy indicate that he had been in touch with President Trump?
He indicated that he had had some conversation. I don't recall whether it was with the president or somebody at the White House, but I think he'd expressed frustration that not taking the circumstance as seriously as they should in that moment.
You know, I asked Kevin McCarthy, who's the Republican leader, about this, and he said he called Donald Trump. He finally got through to Donald Trump, and he said, you have got to get on TV, you've got to get on Twitter, you've got to call these people off. You know what the president said to him? This is as it's happening. He said, well, Kevin, these aren't my people. You know, these are Antifa. And Kevin responded and said, no, they're your people. They literally just came through my office windows, and my staff are running for cover. I mean, they're running for their lives. You need to call them off. And the president's response to Kevin, to me, was chilling. He said, well, Kevin, I guess they're just more upset about the election, theft than you are. And that's, you've seen widespread reports of Kevin McCarthy and the president having basically a swearing conversation. That's when the swearing commenced, because the president was basically saying, I'm okay with this.
Leader McCarthy, the president of the United States.
Couple things there. First and foremost, that shows Trump had an innocent state of mind, that he thought other people than his supporters were doing it. Number two, I get why they're showing that, and it does look bad, and they scored some points. There's no question about that, right? But the other problem is this witness, Butler or whatever representative for name she is, you're playing video of her from literally over a year and a half ago. We need to see her live now and see how she feels. I bet she was pretty upset when she got that recorded, and may see it differently now, that the feds won't say if anybody was there, that nobody will say why the Capitol Police weren't there, why nobody will explain why Trump and everybody asked for more security and they didn't get it. So that's, again, why you do show trials, because you will want to avoid all of the cross-examination and other things that would bring out the truth. They don't want the truth. They want you to believe what they tell you. That's why they're having this presentation.
As a briefing room, steps from the Oval Office. The cameras are hot 24/7, as you know. Why hasn't he walked down and said that now?
I conveyed to the president what I think is best to do, and I'm hopeful the president will do it.
And have you spoken with his chief of staff?
I've spoken to the president. I've spoken to other people in there and to the White House as well.
Who else reached out to Ms. Trump that you know of that afternoon about the attack on the Capitol?
I believe at one point McCarthy did.
I heard my phone ringing, turned the shower off, saw it was Leader McCarthy, who I had a good relationship with. He told me it was getting really ugly over at the Capitol and said, please, anything you could do to help, I would appreciate it. I don't recall specific asks, just anything you could do. Again, I got the sense that, they were scared.
They meaning Mr. McCarthy and people on the Hill because of the violence?
He was scared, yes.
Think about that. Leader McCarthy, who was one of the president's strongest supporters, was scared and begging for help. President Trump turned him down. So he tried to call the president's children. Republican House member Mike Gallagher also implored the president to call off the attack.
Oh, boy.
Mr. President, you have got to stop this. You are the only person.
Folks, I just pointing it out for those of you who are tuning in. We got a lot of new people showing up here and there. Again, we've seen this before. This is not permitted in any courtroom in the United States of America. You cannot repeat testimony that's already been played. It is impermissible. Yet they've done it. This is about the 12th time. We've seen this particular stuff 3 or 4 times, but here it is again.
Who can call this?
And again, same thing. Fog of war. He's in the middle of it. I bet if you talk to him now, he'd be a lot calmer.
Off. Call it off. The election is over. Call it off.
President-elect Joe Biden also went live on TV to demand that President Trump tell the mob to leave.
Oh, wow. Talk about sticking it to you.
I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege.
There was a desperate scramble for everyone to get President Trump to do anything. All this occurred, and the president still did not act.
Now, folks, they haven't explained this, and I don't think they can, but why is it that one person is supposed to tweet something and you've got law enforcement? How is it that Nancy's been in charge of the House now for 4 years? You've got all these people up there, and it's all down to one person. How were they not prepared for this? Is the president supposed to sit up there and take care of every little problem that goes on? This doesn't make any sense.
My friend,
and please, God, for the love of God, please give us a timeline of where we are. Please tell me we're not still at 228, because we got to get to 417 before these people finish.
Thank you, Mr. Kinzinger. President Trump finally relented to the pleas from his staff, his family, and from Capitol Hill for him to do something more at 417. 187 minutes, more than 3 hours after he stopped speaking at the Ellipse. After he stopped speaking to a mob that he had sent armed to the Capitol. That's when he tweeted a video telling the rioters to go home, while also telling them that they were special and that he loved them. By that time, although, the violence was far from over. Law enforcement had started to turn the tide. Reinforcements were on the way, and elected officials were in secure locations. The writing was already on the wall. The rioters would not succeed. Here's what was showing on Fox.
Now, folks, again, this is pretty clearly them signaling that they think that Trump wanted the violence to keep him in power, but they don't explain how it would have, nor do they explain how the violence caused his plan to challenge certification to go away. So, again, this committee is not doing a very good job here.
The channel the president was watching all afternoon.
Back to Brett Baer with more information now. Brett, what do you have?
Our Pentagon team, Jen Griffin, Lucas Tomlinson, confirming the Defense Department has now mobilized the entire D.C. National Guard, 1,800 troops. Takes several hours, as I was mentioning before, to get them up and running. The Army Secretary Ryan McCarthy is setting up a headquarters at the FBI. You just heard from David Spunt that the FBI is also sending troops to the Capitol.
It's no coincidence, then, that President Trump finally gave in and went out to the Rose Garden at 4:03.
Again, I want you to understand we are an hour and 53 minutes in. They have not explained how the violence is going to keep him in power. No
His
explanation.
staff had prepared a script for him to read, but he refused to use it. As you can see on the screen, you can see the script is stamped "President has seen."
We've seen
The
this
script
before,
said,
nothing
quote,
new.
"I'm asking you to leave the capital region now and go home in a peaceful way." The president was urged to stick to this script, but he spoke off the cuff. Eric Hirschman and Nick Luna went with the president to film the message in the Rose Garden. Let's hear what they had to say and see the never-before-seen raw footage of the president recording this video message.
Ultimately, these remarks that we're looking at here in Exhibit 25 were not the remarks that the president delivered in the Rose Garden. Do you know why the president decided not to use these?
I don't know, sir. No, I do not know why.
Did the president use any written remarks to your knowledge, or did he just go off the cuff?
To my knowledge, it was off the cuff, sir.
Good chase.
When you're ready, sir.
You tell me when.
When you're ready, sir.
Who's behind me?
He's gone around. We're all clear now.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had a election, let me say. I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
When I got there, basically the president just had finished filming the video, and I think he was basically retiring for the day.
Was there any discussion about the president releasing a second video that day?
Not that I recall. When he finished his video, I think everyone was like, day's over. People were pretty drained.
Were pretty what?
Drained.
When we say day over, I mean, there were still people in the Capitol at that point, weren't there?
There were people in the Capitol, but I believe by this stage, law enforcement, I'd have to go back and look, but I believe law enforcement was either there or moving in or going to take charge. And I just say people were emotionally drained by the time that videotape was done.
Emotionally drained? At the White House? Here's what was happening at the same time at the Capitol.
Okay, before they do that, so they criticize what he had to say. And folks, he's talking to his people. He knows how to address his people to get them to go home. It worked. And then they're talking about people at the White House were drained. Folks, I mean, this is not a comparison game. Dereliction of duty doesn't mean that somebody had a tougher time than you did. This is just petty. Of course, par for the course for this committee, but anyway, I'm sure there were people far more scared of the Capitol.
Also contains strong language and violence.
Okay, thank you.
Keep pushing. Don't lose the momentum.
Another officer unconscious. The terrorist. What terrorist?
Everybody, we need gas masks. We need weapons. We need strong, angry patriots to help our boys. They don't want to leave.
Now we're trusting them that the timestamp is accurate, and again, this is why you need cross-examination. This is why you need the other side. I don't trust them necessarily. And one other quick point, and this is a very, very good point here, all right? You have to understand, well, you told me that when Trump went out and spoke, oh, well, that was going to take care of it. He went out, he spoke, and they didn't disperse. All because you want to make the petty point that they're drained at the White House, but they're more than drained over at the Capitol. But anyway, she continues.
While President Trump refused to even lift another finger to help, other leaders honored their oaths and acted.
That was not the testimony. He said they were done for the day. Didn't say he refused to lift another finger. Again, folks, for those of you that try cases, don't overreach. Don't do it. Let the jury come to their own conclusion.
The Capitol and resume the joint session. For instance, here are never-before-seen photos and video of congressional leaders in action during the attack. The video is a portion of a call they had at approximately 4:45 with Acting Secretary of Defense, Chris Miller.
We're not going to let these people keep us from finishing our business, so we need you to get the building cleared, give us the okay so we can go back in session and finish up the people's business as soon as possible.
What time is it when this is going on?
Mr. Secretary and Senator Schumer, some people here in the Capitol Police believe it would take us several days to secure the building. Do you agree with that analysis?
I'm not on the ground, but I do not agree with that analysis.
So what is the earliest that we could safely resume our proceedings?
All right, this is
in
critical.
the Senate and House
Critical
chambers?
information here.
The earliest we could safely resume.
Here's my assessment, but I prefer to be on the ground, which I personally would prefer to be right now, but I need to be here. I would say in this case, we're looking at 4 to 5 hours.
All right, so once again, they undermine their own case. If they can get the building secured in 4 or 5 hours, they can finish the certification. Now, here's the important point. You remember they wanted to impugn Trump. Trump's not trying to get the Capitol people out of there. What's he doing? He's calling senators about the objections. Folks, I can tell you what happened. When they reconvened in 4 or 5 hours, everybody, those 8 senators and 139 congresspeople that were going to object to certification, they said no more. And they said, no, we're not going to object at all. Let's just confirm Biden. So, again, they just undermined their own case.
And also
how bad and incompetent do you have to be to undermine your own show trial?
From his own secure evacuation location, including conversations with Acting Secretary of Defense, Miller, and other military leaders, well past President Trump's 417 video. Let's look at some never-before-seen photographs of the Vice President during this critical time, and hear about the Vice President's conversation with military leaders to secure the Capitol and ensure everyone was safe.
Vice President Pence, there were 2 or 3 calls with Vice President Pence.
Okay, this is not new, folks. This has been seen. She just lied. These people, they just lie about everything.
Unambiguous orders. There was no question about that. And I can get you the exact quotes, I guess, from some of our records somewhere, but he was very animated, very direct, very firm, and to Secretary Miller. Get the military down here, get the guard down here, put down this situation, etc.
As you heard earlier in the hearing, the President did not call the Vice President or anyone in the military, federal law enforcement, or D.C. government. Not a single person. But General Milley did hear from Mark Meadows. The contrast between that call and his calls with Vice President Pence tell you everything you need to know.
Now, again, they've done this many times, and we've pointed it out many times. They have not established that Trump didn't order people below him to do these things. And again, as I predicted, we're now sitting at 2 hours and 3 minutes, so they're going to go long again for no apparent reason. I mean, it's just unbelievable. They could have done this in an hour, folks.
President Trump's dereliction of duty. Let's listen.
He said, this is from memory. He said, we have to kill the narrative that the Vice President is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that that the President is still in charge and that things are steady or stable. Or
nothing new here. This has been played before.
That is politics, politics, politics. Red flag for me personally, no action. But I remember,
Hearing Mark Milley impugn somebody for politics is rich.
And I don't do political narratives.
So while President Trump and his advisors were drained, other leaders upheld their oaths to do the right thing. Maybe it was exhausting to get the president to put out that video, but think about the law enforcement officers who were attacked by the mob that day. And President Trump had summoned them himself to Washington. And what about President Trump? He watched TV, tweeted, called senators to try to delay the count of electoral votes, called Rudy Giuliani, and argued with his staff who were insisting that he should call off the attack. Ms. Matthews, what was your reaction to President Trump's message to the mob at 417?
I was struck by the fact that he chose to begin the video by pushing the lie that there was a stolen election. And as the video went on, I felt a small sense of relief because he finally told these people to go home. But that was immediately followed up by him saying, "We love you, you're very special." And that was disturbing to me because he didn't distinguish between those that peacefully attended his speech earlier that day and those that we watched cause violence at the Capitol. Instead, he told the people who we had just watched storm our nation's Capitol with the intent on overthrowing our democracy, violently attack police officers, and chant heinous things like "Hang Mike Pence, we love you, you're very special." And as a spokesperson for him, I knew that I would be asked to defend that. And
so again, folks, this is why you don't do show trials, because it encourages people like Matthews, who's a prima donna. She's looking for fame. She's just looking to advance her own interest. It encourages people like that to come forward. And you can easily see if you have any objectivity to you at all. Oh, a lie and this and that. I mean, she's a complete snake in the grass. I mean, she's not very. And here's the thing that the January 6th committee can't understand because they never hear from anybody else. But she's not nearly as effective. And if you've been watching this live stream from the very beginning, and if you haven't, go back and watch. Check out Pottinger. Comparison of these two people who are both trying to come in there and they know they're going to say anti-Trump stuff. Which one has been more effective in your mind? Obviously, Pottinger. Because he's keeping it in the road, and you're like, well, he's just a guy that was trying to serve the president and it just went too far. She's clearly anti-Trump, and she's showing it.
His refusal to act and call off the mob that day and his refusal to condemn the violence was indefensible. And so I knew that I would be resigning that evening. And so I finished out the workday, went home and called my loved ones to tell them of my decision, and resigned that evening.
Thank you. Indefensible. Let's hear what some of your colleagues in the press office told us about their reaction to this same 417 message.
I felt like it was the absolute bare minimum of what could have been said at that point for something on camera.
What else do you think should have been said?
A more forceful dismissal of the violence, a more
folks again.
To go home,
who cares what this person says? A difference of opinion are not dereliction of duty. They're just not.
To the respect that we have given law enforcement,
especially derelictions of duty from people who are far below you. I mean, come on.
And I thought it was important that an acknowledgement be given to the U.S. Capitol building itself, what it's a symbol of, what it means, not only to the people that work there, but to the American people generally, and the work of Congress that by law needed to be conducted that day.
Do you wish, in hindsight, that the president had asked the protesters to leave the Capitol earlier than he ended up asking them to do that?
Of course, I would love if the go-home message would have happened earlier in the day.
The president's words matter. We know that many of the rioters were listening to President Trump. We heard from one last week, Stephen Ayers. Let's listen to what he had to say about the 417 message from the president and see how rioters reacted to the president's message in real time.
Well, when we were there, as soon as that come out, everybody started talking about it, and it seemed like it started to disperse. You know, some.
That's from the last hearing.
That's our order. He says go home. He says go home. Yeah, he said to go home.
But just as Mr. Ayers said, police were still fending off the last throes of the brutal assault. I yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
While everyone else was working to get Congress back in session, what did President Trump do?
Oh, boy.
At 6:01, just 1 minute after the citywide curfew went into effect, he posted his last tweet of the day. After officers engaged in multiple hours of hand-to-hand combat, with over 100 of them sustaining injuries, President Trump tweeted at 6:01 and justified the violence as a natural response to the election. He said, quote, "These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide victory is so unceremoniously, viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly, unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and peace. Remember this day forever." He called the mob great patriots. He told people to remember the day forever. He showed absolutely.
Folks, 2 hours, 10 minutes into this sham.
A few minutes later, at 6:27,
Hopefully they're close to
the
being
president
done.
left the dining room and he went up to the White House residence for the night. On the screen is the last photograph of the president that night as he went into the residence. As he was gathering his things in the dining room to leave, President Trump reflected on the day's events with a White House employee. This was the same employee who had met President Trump in the Oval Office after he returned from the ellipse. President Trump said nothing to the employee about the attack. He said only, quote, "Mike Pence let me down." Ms. Matthews, what was your reaction to President Trump's 6:01 tweet?
At that point, I had already made the decision to resign, and this tweet just further cemented my decision. I thought that January 6th, 2021 was one of the darkest days in our nation's history, and President Trump was treating it as a celebratory occasion with that tweet. And so it just further cemented my decision to resign.
Others agreed with your assessment of that tweet. Let's look at what they had to say.
Who asked you
They're
about
nothing
this
if not
before it was
predictable,
sent?
folks.
The president. Tell us about that conversation, everything that you said and he said, to the best of your recollection.
Sure. So he said, "What do you think of this?" And I believe I saw the text message or on his phone. And I remember saying to him, the wording on the first sentence, I guess it's one long sentence, but the wording on the first sentence would lead some to believe that potentially he had something to do with the events that happened at the Capitol.
What did he say?
I don't recall him saying anything in response to that. I believe that was in the conversation.
Did he change anything in light of your comments?
No, sir, he did not.
And what about this made you think that someone might perceive the president having a role in the violence at the Capitol?
It was my interpretation of the words. I mean, I'm not I don't write speeches or anything, but the phrase, "These are the things that happened," to me sounded as if culpability was associated with it, to me.
I don't think it's a patriotic act to attack the Capitol, but I have no idea how to characterize the people other than they trespassed, destroyed property, and assaulted the U.S. Capitol. I think calling them patriots is, let's say, a stretch, to say the least.
Is that all it is, a stretch, or just flatly wrong?
I don't think it's a patriotic act to attack the U.S. Capitol.
Would you call it unpatriotic?
Criminal? Unpatriotic? Sure.
What happened at the Capitol cannot be justified in any form or fashion. It was wrong and it was tragic, and it was a terrible day. It was a terrible day for this country.
I thought it was inappropriate.
Why?
To my mind, it was a day that should be remembered in infamy. That wasn't the tenor of this tweet.
Despite the violence of the day, the effort to delay the certification continued. That evening, Rudy Giuliani called several of President Trump's closest political allies in the hour before the joint session resumed. Representative Jim Jordan and Senators Marsha Blackburn, Tommy Tuberville, Bill Hagerty, Lindsey Graham, Josh Hawley, and Ted Cruz. We know why Mr. Giuliani was calling them, because at 7:02, he left a voicemail for Senator Tuberville, which later became public. Let's listen to just the start of it.
Senator Tuberville, or I should say Coach Tuberville, this is Rudy Giuliani, President's lawyer. I'm calling you because I want to discuss with you how they're trying to rush this hearing and how we need you, our Republican friends, to try to just slow it down so we can get these legislatures to get more information to you.
Mr. Giuliani did not even mention the attack on the Capitol.
Folks, this is what I've been telling you about all night. This is very dangerous for them to get into this. When we wrap up, when they stop, and they should stop in the next 5 to 10 minutes, what they typically do is they let each person that examined, so that'll be Kinzinger and Loria, and then they let both Benny Thompson and Cheney make statements, usually about 2 minutes each. So when they stop this Kinzinger, they're going to have 8 minutes, I'm guessing, and we'll be done. But, folks, this is very dangerous, because what we're going to learn if they get to it is that the plan to challenge doesn't go through now that the riot happened. So riddle me this, Batman. How could Trump have wanted the riot, but then now realize his certification challenges aren't going to go through?
He was
very
pushing on
dangerous
behalf of
territory
President
here.
Trump to get members of Congress to further delay the certification. Even though some members did proceed with objections, Vice President Pence and Congress stood firm and successfully concluded the joint session in the early morning hours of January 7th. Here are some of what members of the president's party said in the days and weeks after the attack.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day.
We've seen all this, folks.
question about it.
Fog of war. Who cares?
The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth.
The violence, destruction, and chaos we saw earlier was unacceptable, undemocratic, and un-American. It was the saddest day I've ever had as serving as a member of this institution.
Madam Speaker, today the People's House was attacked, which is an attack on the Republic itself. There is no excuse for it. A woman died, and people need to go to jail. And the president should never have spun up certain Americans to believe something that simply cannot be.
Well, after 3 in the morning, Congress certified the 2020 election results. Soon after, this statement by President Trump was posted.
You know what would be funny is if we showed video of the election at about midnight on November 3rd. You'd see a bunch of people declaring Trump a victor. And the same thing when they show this video of people in the days in the fog of war after January 6th, folks. It doesn't mean anything.
Dan Scavino's Twitter account because the president's account by now had been suspended. As you can see, President Trump stuck with his big lie that the election was stolen. But he did say there would be an orderly transition. We learned, though, that the statement was not necessarily his idea. Jason Miller, a campaign advisor, told us that after the joint session started, he heard nothing from President Trump or the White House about assuring the nation that the transfer of power would take place. So Mr. Miller took it upon himself to draft the statement and call the president at 9:23 that night to convince him to put it out. Let's listen to what he had to say about the call.
Did he disagree with something that you had put in the statement, some particular word or phrase that he did not want included?
I'd say just he wanted to say peaceful transition, and I said that ship's kind of already sailed, so we're going to say orderly transition. That was about the extent of disagreement or pushback from the conversation.
The last person President Trump spoke to by phone that night was Johnny McEntee, his head of personnel. Mr. McEntee told us that they talked about the events of the day and the multiple resignation by administration officials. The decision whether to resign was one that weighed heavily on people in the administration. On the one hand, people like Mr. Pottinger and Ms. Matthews here, as proud as they were to have served, refused to be associated with President Trump's dereliction of duty. But others were sincerely worried that leaving President Trump to his own devices would put the country at continued risk. Listen to what we heard about that tension from Pat Cipollone, from General Mark Milley, and Eugene Scalia, who was the Secretary of Labor.
And then after that, some people were resigning, obviously, over January 6th. We know who they were. Did I consider it? Yes. Did I do it? No. Concerned about is if people in the counsel's office left, who would replace me? And I had some concerns that it might be somebody who, had been giving bad advice.
On the morning of the 7th, the decision I arrived at was that the most constructive thing I could think of was to seek a meeting of the cabinet. I thought that trying to work within the administration to steady the ship was likely to have greater value than simply resigning, after which point I would have been powerless to really affect things within the administration.
She thought that there should be a cabinet meeting.
Do you know why that would not be?
I don't remember why. I think it probably had something to do with Mark's view of how the president might react and that but things like that.
Now, there was a couple of calls where, Meadows and/or Pompeo, but more Meadows, how's the president doing? Like Pompeo might say, how's the president doing? And Meadows would say, well, he's in a really dark place. Like here's one, for example, on the 7th of January. So this is day after, right? POTUS is very emotional and in a bad place. Meadows.
As you heard, Secretary Scalia wanted President Trump to convene a cabinet meeting. He put his request in a memo to the president, and here's what it said. You can see that Secretary Scalia recommended that the president, quote, no longer publicly question the election results. After Wednesday, no one can deny this is harmful. Secretary Scalia also highlighted the importance of the public knowing the president would invoke his cabinet in decision-making and not, quote, certain private individuals. Though Secretary Scalia did not say it, he was referring to Rudy Giuliani and the rest of the so-called clown car working with President Trump to try to overturn the election. Secretary Scalia understood that the president needed to do more to reassure the public about the...
I'm sure y'all know this, but Scalia, Eugene Scalia, is the son of former Justice Antonin Scalia. And again, they're just using, people who are Republicans to try to smear Trump.
Few weeks of the Trump administration. Mr. Pottinger, when you made the decision to resign, did you walk out of the White House immediately?
No, I wanted to first talk to my immediate boss, that was the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Robert O'Brien was traveling on the 6th. I reached him at about 4:30 p.m. And told him that I was submitting my resignation. He accepted the resignation, but he also asked whether I could stay until he could get back to the White House. And I agreed to that. We both wanted to make sure that I was leaving in a responsible way. We still have
I don't know what this is
adversaries
going
worry
to,
about,
other than wasting our time.
hackers, terrorists,
But again, as the point I made earlier, this guy comes across as far more genuine than does Miss Matthews, who comes across as far more vindictive and partisan.
National security staffer in the White House. So I ended up staying at my desk through the night. When Robert O'Brien arrived back at the White House the next morning, the morning of the 7th, I debriefed with him and left for the last time.
So you and I both share a passion for national security of our country. Can you share with me, what's your view on how January 6th impacted our national security?
Well, when you have a presidential
God.
transition, even under the best circumstances, it's a time of vulnerability. It's a time of vulnerability. And when you have a contested election, I was certainly concerned that some of our adversaries would be tempted to probe or test U.S. resolve. As an example, in late December, the Iranian government attacked the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. They did that using some of their terrorist proxies. President Trump did handle that. He sent a very clear warning to the Ayatollah and his regime, which I think had a useful effect. I think that we would have handled other threats of that nature, and luckily no other threats materialized before the inauguration on the 20th. But our national security was harmed.
Folks,
in a different
this
way
is
by,
a complete.
the 6th
We're
of
all now
January.
dumber
That
from
is
having heard this. This has nothing to do with anything. Nothing.
I think it emboldened our
Who cares
our
what you
enemies
think?
by helping give them ammunition to feed a narrative that our system of government doesn't work, that the United States is in decline. China, the Putin regime in Russia, Tehran, they're fond of pushing those kinds of narratives. And by the way, they're wrong. We've been hearing for the entirety of U.S. history from kings and despots that the United States is in decline, and those kings and despots have been proven wrong every single time. But nonetheless, January 6th helped feed a perception that I think emboldens our adversaries. The other part I think is simply our allies. I heard from a lot of friends in Europe, in Asia, allies, close friends, and supporters of the United States that they were concerned about the health of our democracy. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to put their minds at ease, to put our own hearts at ease by investigating what happened on the 6th and making sure that it never happens again.
Look, I've always said democracies are not defined by bad days. They're defined by how they recover from those bad days. And that's what we're doing here, is to bring accountability to that so we can actually come back even stronger than when we went into January 6th. Ms. Matthews, as you left the White House for the last time that night, January 6th, what did you think Americans needed to hear from President Trump?
I think that the American people needed to hear and see him publicly commit to a peaceful or at least orderly transition of power. In the aftermath of the Capitol attack, it wasn't just enough for us to ask him to condemn the violence. He needed to agree that he would peacefully transfer power over to the incoming administration.
Okay, folks, so the irrelevant opinions of underlings at the White House are not relevant to dereliction of duty. We are now 2 hours, 28 minutes. This is by far the longest hearing they've had. This committee continues to get worse. They don't learn from their mistakes. They don't listen to anyone else. This last little bit here, folks, you want to end on a big note. You want to drop the mic and walk off. You're dropping off with these two people blathering on about their nonsense opinions about who knows
the White
what.
House on the morning of January 7th knew the president needed to address the nation again, and they had a speech prepared for him that morning, but he refused for hours to give it. As you heard Cassidy Hutchins testify previously, President Trump finally agreed to record an address to the nation later that evening, the evening of January 7th, because of concerns he might be removed from power under the 25th Amendment or by impeachment. We know these threats were real. Sean Hannity said so himself in a
Folks, I have to jump in here. I know we all want to get done with this, and we're a little behind the feed. But folks, the 25th Amendment is not for removing the president unless it's health. So there's no basis to do that. None. Now, you can impeach him, and they tried to do that and failed.
Message that day to Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. He wrote, "No more stolen election talk. Yes, impeachment and 25th Amendment are real." We obtained the
We've seen all this before.
the
Again,
president recording his address to the nation that day on January 7th, more than 24 hours after the last time he had addressed the nation from the Rose Garden. Let's take a look.
Whenever you're ready, sir.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday, and to those who broke the law, you will pay. You do not represent our movement, you do not represent our country, and if you broke the law, you can't say that. I already said you will pay. The demonstrators who infiltrated the Capitol have defied the seat of justice. It's defiled, right? See, I can't see it very well. Okay, I'll do this. I'm going to do this. Let's go. But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
Thought Congress is certified. Now Congress is
Yeah, right.
Now Congress
I didn't say over, so let me see. Go to the paragraph before. Okay? I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack yesterday. Yesterday is a hard word for me.
Just take that. The heinous attack.
Good. Take the word yesterday, because it doesn't work with the heinous attack on our country.
I know why they're doing this. I don't think it's very effective.
My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote. My only goal was to ensure the integrity of the vote.
On January 7th, one day after he incited an insurrection based on a lie, President Trump still could not say that the election was over.
Because he didn't believe it. Oh, my God. Talk about this committee steps on their, they just literally fall over their own face all the time. You just showed irrefutable proof that he believes the election was stolen. Your whole committee has no basis if that's the case. None. Everything that you're trying to do, it needs him to believe that he really did lose the election and he was trying to stay in power.
Mr.
These people
Pottinger,
are incompetent.
You've taken the oath multiple times in the Marines and as an official in the executive branch. Can you please share with us your view about the oath of office? And
Who cares what his view is?
Election results
His view is no more important than my view, any of your view listening.
Sure.
This is
isn't
just,
the first
God,
time we've had a close
this is hard to watch, really hard to watch.
in this country. And President Trump certainly had every right to check.
It's the first time that I've ever seen, and I've followed, presidential elections for well over 40, 45 years. I don't know what you're talking about. You had more changes. You had more people voting in different ways. You had days and days and days of not counting of ballots. I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't know why we're still doing this. They've been going for 2 hours.
Various elections.
They've been going for too long.
But once you've had due process under the law, you have to conform with the law, no matter how bitter the result. Once you've presented your evidence in court, judges have heard that evidence, judges have ruled. If you continue to contest an election, you're not just contesting an election anymore. You're actually challenging the Constitution itself. You are challenging the societal norms that allow us to remain unified. I think that one example, for example, you've got Vice President Richard Nixon back in 1960 had lost a hard-fought election against Senator John F. Kennedy. There were irregularities in that vote, according to a lot of the histories, and a lot of Vice President Nixon's supporters asked him to fight, contest it, don't concede. But in one of his finest moments, Vice President Nixon said no. He said it would tear the country to pieces, and he conceded to Jack Kennedy and announced that he was going to support him as the next president. We have an example of a Democratic candidate for president, Vice President Al Gore, who faced a very similar dilemma. He strongly disagreed.
It was not a similar dilemma. There was no question of fraud in the election. A better example would be the election of 1876. I don't know why these people are blathering on. This is not effective.
But he gave a speech of concession in late December, mid or late December of 2000, where he said, this is for the sake of the unity of us as a people and for the strength of our democracy. I also am going to concede. I'm going to support the new president. His speech is actually a pretty good model, I think, for any candidate for any office, up to and including the president, and from any party to read, particularly right now. The oath that our presidents take.
This guy was actually a pretty good witness. This is now painful. His opinions are irrelevant to dereliction of duty, which we've already discussed is not a crime. I don't know what we're doing listening to this guy drone on
to bear
about.
true faith and allegiance to the Constitution. And it is a sacred oath. It's an oath that we take before our families. We take that oath before God.
They are so unaware,
I think
so
that,
unaware. Okay, dude, just shut up.
We have
Just stop.
An obligation to live by that oath. I do still believe that we have the most ingenious system of government on earth.
Hearing Democrats drone on about the Constitution and oaths and stuff just makes you want to throw up. I mean, come on, guys. Look at the way you've been governing lately. Just end this. Come on. You don't have any new evidence. You don't have anything.
Every 4 to 8 years, and it's not something that we should take for granted.
Okay, please, God, for the love of God, let's be done.
Thank you. As we heard at the start of the hearing, in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy understood that President Trump bore responsibility for that day and should have taken immediate action to stop the violence. He was even more candid in calls with Republican colleagues. As you'll hear in a moment, recordings of some of these calls that were later published by the New York Times. The context for these calls was that a resolution had been introduced in the House calling for Vice President Pence and the cabinet to remove President Trump from power under the 25th Amendment. Let's listen.
I've had it with this guy. What he did is unacceptable. Nobody can defend that, and nobody should defend it. The only discussion I would have with him is that I think this will pass, and it would be my recommendation we should resign.
All right, McCarthy is disqualified for any future positions of leadership if he's talking about the 25th Amendment. I don't know that he is talking about the 25th Amendment. Folks, the 25th Amendment has to do with the limited situation of where the president is physically incapacitated. He's going in for heart surgery. He's going in for cancer surgery, right? Not because you disagree with him. It is not another way to impeach the president, as people like this are suggesting. But we've heard this before. I don't know that he was necessarily talking about the 25th Amendment. Just wanted to give you the background.
I mean, that would be my take, but I don't think he would take it. But I don't know.
But let me be very clear to all of you, and I've been very clear to the president. He bears responsibilities for his words and actions. No ifs, ands, or buts. I asked him personally today, does he hold responsibility for what happened? Does he feel bad about what happened? He told me he does have some responsibility for what happened. And he needs to acknowledge that.
President Trump has never publicly acknowledged his responsibility for the attack.
You haven't shown that he was
did so
responsible.
was in that private call with Kevin McCarthy. There's something else President Trump has never acknowledged: the names and the memories of the officers who died following the attack on the Capitol.
You know, they because they're never checked, they're used to lying all the time. Not one single solitary Capitol officer lost his life as a result of that, what happened at the Capitol. Not one. They all died of things not related to that, okay? Correlation is not causation. Folks, imagine having nothing, having a show trial, and still needed to pile on lies on top of that. It is pathetic. Pathetic.
We're honored to be
And
joined
easily disproven.
by police and first responders who bravely protected us on January 6th. Your character and courage.
This is another
give
common
us
thing
hope.
they've been doing, is
that
they've been
democracy
recognizing
can and
people
should
in the
prevail,
crowd. Again, has
even in
no
the face
evidentiary
of the
value.
violent
Folks, you're seeing
insurrection.
this. What evidentiary
We
value does this
emphasize
have? Here's some people that are on our side
what
and
you
got
did to
harmed
protect
and now
our
hate
democracy.
Trump. Take a look. Here, stand up.
On
Take a bow.
January 9th,
What is the point
two
of this?
President Trump's top campaign officials texted each other about the president's glaring silence on the tragic death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who succumbed to his injuries the night of January 7th. These campaign officials were Tim Murtaugh, Trump's director of communications, and one of his deputies, Matthew Walking. Their job was to convince people to vote for President Trump, so they knew his heart, his mind, and his voice as well as anyone. And they knew how he connects with his supporters. Here's what they had to say about their boss. Murtaugh said, "Also shitty not to have acknowledged the death of the Capitol police officer." Walking responded, "That's enraging to me. Everything he said about supporting law enforcement was a lie." To which Murtaugh replied, "You know what this is? Of course, if he acknowledged the dead cop, he'd be implicitly faulting the mob. And he won't do that because they're his people. And he would also be close
It's
to
all fog
acknowledging
of war stuff. Who knows what these people
lit
said?
the
Get them in there
rally got
now,
out of
folks.
control.
This
No
is,
way he
again, hate to pull the lawyer card, but look, folks, this is rank hearsay. It is out-of-court testimony offered for the proof of the matter asserted, right? Are these people still living? Go get them. Let's talk to them. Again, this is why you don't believe in hearsay. It's not reliable. We have no idea what they meant. Again, folks, they're not ending on a high note. They're going to be giving their closing statements here soon. They've droned on for, it looks like, 2.5 hours or so, and we're nowhere near the end.
Called his fault. No way. President Trump did not then and does not now have the character or courage to say to the American people what his own people know to be true. He is responsible for the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Thank you, and I yield to the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you.
Please,
Ms.
God,
Lorio.
please be over.
Tonight's testimony and evidence
this looks
is
like
as
a
sobering as it is straightforward. Within minutes of stepping off the ellipse stage, Donald Trump knew about the violent attack on the Capitol. From the comfort of his dining room, he watched on TV as the attack escalated. He sent tweets that inflamed and expressed support for the desire of some to literally kill Vice President Mike Pence. For 3 hours, he refused to call off the attack. Donald Trump refused to take the urgent advice he received that day. Not from his political opponents or from the liberal media, but from his own family, his own friends, his own staff, and his own advisors. In the midst of an attack, when there was no time for politics, the people closest to Trump told him the truth. It was his supporters attacking the Capitol, and he alone could get through to them. So they pled for him to act, to place his country above himself. Still, he refused to lead and to meet the moment to honor his oath. It was only once the vice president and the members
Okay,
of
folks, this is the closing. So if prior history tells us anything, we'll hear from Kinzinger, then we'll hear from Loria. and then we'll hear from
telling the
Cheney
mob to
and
go home.
maybe Benny Thompson.
even then,
Since he's sick, we
told
may
them
not
all
hear
they
from him.
were
I praise
special.
and pray to
And
God
they
that we
loved
don't, because this has been going on forever. Longest one by
Whatever your
far.
politics,
Least effective by far, too.
whatever you think about the outcome of the election, we as Americans must all agree on this. Donald Trump's conduct on January 6th was a supreme violation of his oath of office and a complete dereliction of his duty to our nation.
No,
It is a
I don't
stain
agree.
on our history.
I don't
It
agree.
is a dishonor
I disagree.
to all those who have sacrificed and died in service
No,
of
it's
our
not.
democracy.
It's not. Calm down.
When we present our full findings, we will recommend changes to laws and policies to guard against another January 6th. The reason that's imperative is that the forces Donald Trump ignited that day have not gone away. The militant, intolerant ideologies, the militias, the alienation and the disaffection, the weird fantasies and disinformation. They're all
Folks,
still out
you're
there,
listening to
ready
fascism.
go.
You do understand that. This
That's
is
the
literal
elephant in the
fascism
room.
right here. You're listening to it.
But if January
People disagree
6th
with us,
reminded us
and we
of
got to get
anything,
rid of them.
I pray
Okay?
it has reminded
Nobody
us of
died,
this.
but one of the supposed
Laws are
rioters.
just words on paper. They mean nothing without public servants dedicated to the rule of law and who are held accountable by a public that believes oaths matter more than party tribalism or the cheap thrill of scoring political points. We, the people, must
Do you think that Adam Kinzinger is getting a cheap thrill from being on this committee? Do you think Liz Cheney is getting a cheap political thrill for being on this committee and raising money off of it? Folks, these people are literally becoming characters of themselves.
more of our politicians and ourselves. Oaths matter. Character matters. Truth matters.
Folks, that none of that means anything. That's like if a tree falls in the woods, did it make sound? I mean, come on. Folks, this is
If we do
platitudinal
not
nonsense.
renew our faith and commitment to these principles, this great experiment of ours, our shining beacon on a hill, will not endure. I yield to the gentlewoman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Kinzinger. Throughout our hearings, we've provided many facts and painted a vivid picture of the events of January 6th. The violence, the human toll, both emotional and physical, including the tragic loss of life. The threats to our Constitution, the rule of law, and the danger to this nation, a nation we all love as Americans. In tonight's hearing, we've gone into great detail about the events inside the White House on January 6th. We've described how the President of the United States, who was bound by oath to the Constitution and by duty to ensure the laws are faithfully executed, took no action when the cornerstone of our democracy, a peaceful transition of power, was under attack. But it's more than that. Donald Trump summoned a violent mob and promised to lead that mob to the Capitol to compel those he thought would cave to that kind of pressure. And when he was thwarted in his effort to lead the armed uprising, he instigated the attackers to target the vice president with violence, a man who just wanted to do his constitutional duty. So in the end, this is not, as it may appear, a story of inaction in a time of crisis. But instead, it was the final action of Donald Trump's own plan to assert the will of the American people and remain in power. Not until it was clear that his effort to violently disrupt or delay the counting of the election results had failed did he send a message to his supporters in which he commiserated with their pain, and he told them affectionately to go home. That was not the message of condemnation and just punishment for those who broke the law that we expect from a president whose oath and duty is to ensure the laws are faithfully executed. But instead, It was his newest version of stand back and stand by. To me, this is personal.
These people are such
I
clowns.
first swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution against enemies foreign and domestic.
Hearing Democrats talk about
Whenever the
oaths,
US Naval
folks, I
Academy,
can barely keep
age
my food
17.
down. Luckily, I didn't eat to do this live stream.
I spent 2 decades on
Nobody
ships
cares
at
if it's
sea,
personal. It's not about you,
defending our
lady.
nation from known
Golly.
and identifiable foreign
Hopefully, Cheney
enemies
will
who
be
sought
brief.
to do us harm. I never imagined that that enemy would come from within. I was not as prescient as Abraham Lincoln, who 23 years before the Civil War said, "If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and its finisher." Donald Trump was the author, and we the people, for ourselves and our posterity, should not let Donald Trump be the finisher. Thank you, and I yield to the Vice Chair.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Luria. I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions.
All right,
Without
thankfully, it looks
objection,
like they're
members
done.
will be permitted 10 business days to
Yeah,
submit
this is when they
statements for the record,
close. So I
including
think they're
opening
done,
remarks and additional
which is good. Thank
questions
God.
from our witnesses. I'd now like to turn things to Chairman Thompson for a few closing words.
Oh, Jesus. I thought we were done.
The members of the committee, and I appreciate and thank all persons who've come forward voluntarily to provide information to help protect our democracy. And our work continues. As we've made clear throughout these hearings, our investigation is going forward. We continue to receive new information every day. We are pursuing many additional witnesses.
Folks, they're not receiving new information. They're getting more people that want to get famous coming out of the woodwork, but that's not new information.
Our findings to the American people and pushing for accountability. In the first hearing of this series, I asked the American people to consider the facts and judge for themselves. The facts are clear and unambiguous. I thank the American people for their attention over the past several weeks. I wish you all a pleasant evening.
And let me again thank our witnesses today. We've seen bravery and honor in these hearings, and Ms. Matthews and Mr. Pottinger, both of you will be remembered for that, as will Cassidy Hutchinson. She sat here alone, took the oath, and testified before millions of Americans. She knew all along that she would be attacked by President Trump and by the 50, 60, and 70-year-old men who hide themselves behind executive privilege. But like our witnesses today, she has courage, and she did it anyway. Cassidy, Sarah, and our other witnesses, including Officer Caroline Edwards, Shay Moss, and her mother, Ruby Freeman, are an inspiration to American women and to American girls. We owe a debt to all of those who have and will appear here. And that brings me to another point. This committee has shown you the testimony of dozens of Republican witnesses, those who served President Trump loyally for years. The case against Donald Trump in these hearings is not made by witnesses who were his political enemies. It is instead a series of confessions by Donald Trump's own appointees, his own friends, his own campaign officials, people who worked for him for years, and his own family. They have come forward and they have told the American people the truth. And for those of you who seem to think the evidence would be different if Republican leader McCarthy had not withdrawn his nominees from this committee, let me ask you this. Do you really think Bill Barr is such a delicate flower that he would wilt under cross-examination?
Oh my
Pat
God!
Cipollone, Eric Hirschman,
Oh
Jeff
my
Rosen,
God! She's
Richard
going
Donahue.
after.
Of
She's
course they aren't.
attacking.
None of our witnesses are.
Okay, first off, Liz Cheney. Oh my God, I'm sorry, folks. I'm taking notes on this thing. So I did not. I mean, I was sort of one bad. Oh my God, she's finally acknowledging the criticism of other people saying there's no cross-examination. And she goes, do you think that they're so weak that they would will? No, you absolute imbecile. That's not what cross-examination is about. Cross-examination is about bringing another point of view to the, like I've been doing. That's what this live stream is about. Me telling you at different times in the stages. They're telling about that. That's not true. This came here. You got to know this. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. That's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
At one point
Wow.
in 2016, when he was first running for office, Donald Trump said this: I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters. That quote came to mind last week when audio from Trump advisor Steve Bannon
Folks, I'm not even going to address that. It's so ridiculous and stupid.
from October 31st, 2020, just a few days before the presidential election. Let's listen.
And what Trump's going to do is just declare victory, right? He's going to declare victory. But that doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count. Theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm. Also, if Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it. If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
And of course, 4 days later, President Trump declared victory when his own campaign advisors told him he had absolutely no basis to do so. What the new Steve Bannon audio demonstrates is that Donald Trump's plan to falsely claim victory in 2020, no matter what the facts actually were, was premeditated. Perhaps worse, Donald Trump believed he could convince his voters to buy it, whether he had any actual evidence of fraud or not. And this same thing continued to occur from Election Day onward until January 6th. Donald Trump was confident that he could convince his supporters the election was stolen, no matter how many lawsuits he lost, and he lost scores of them. He was told over and over again in immense detail that the election was not stolen. There was no evidence of widespread fraud.
So, folks, apparently the piece de resistance is going to be Liz Cheney, which, folks, if you find this effective, okay, to me it just sounds like droning on nonsense. This is not effective, folks. Anybody that's ever presented anything to a jury, you want evidence, testimony from the people, not the prosecutor here droning on about what she sees and she thinks. Unbelievable. I mean, just unbelievable.
Donald Trump was confident he could persuade his supporters to believe whatever he said, no matter how outlandish, and ultimately that they could be summoned to Washington to help him remain president for another term.
They still haven't explained how that was going to happen.
As we showed you last week, even President Trump's legal team, led by Rudy Giuliani, knew they had no actual evidence to demonstrate the election was stolen. Again, it didn't matter. Here's the worst part. Donald Trump knows that millions of Americans who supported him would stand up and defend our nation were it threatened. They would put their lives and their freedom at stake to protect her. And he is preying on their patriotism. He is preying on their sense of justice. And on January 6th, Donald Trump turned their love of country into a weapon against our Capitol and our Constitution.
Still haven't explained how that was going to keep him in power.
False impression that America is threatened by a foreign force controlling voting machines, or that a wave of tens of millions of false ballots were secretly injected into our election system, or that ballot workers have secret thumb drives and are stealing elections with them. All complete nonsense. We must remember that we cannot abandon the truth and remain a free nation. In late November of 2020, while President Trump was still pursuing lawsuits, many of us were urging
This is the longest closing she's given, anybody's given, in any of the 8 hearings. Again, they get worse the more they do. It's unbelievable.
Approached, I circulated a memo to my Republican colleagues explaining why our congressional proceedings to count electoral votes could not be used to change the outcome of the election. But what I did not know at the time was that President Trump's own advisors, also Republicans, also conservatives, including his White House counsel, his Justice Department, his campaign officials, they were all telling him almost exactly the same thing I was telling my colleagues. There was no evidence of fraud or irregularities sufficient to change the election outcome. Our courts had ruled it was over. Now we know that it didn't matter what any of us said because Donald Trump wasn't looking for the right answer legally or the right answer factually. He was looking for a way to remain in office. Let's put that aside for a moment and focus just on what we saw today. In our hearing tonight, you saw an American president faced with a stark and unmistakable choice between right and wrong. There was no ambiguity, no nuance. Donald Trump made a purposeful choice to violate his oath of office, to ignore the ongoing violence against law enforcement, to threaten our constitutional order. There is no way to excuse
See, she thinks if she says it, it becomes true, and that's not the way it works.
And every American must consider this. Can a president who is willing to make the choices Donald Trump made during the violence of January 6th ever be trusted with any position of authority in our
See,
great
there you
nation?
go. Got it going
again?
after him, keep him from running again.
In this room, in 1918, the Committee on Women's Suffrage convened to discuss and debate whether women should be granted the right to vote.
What's that got to do with anything?
This room is full of history, and we on this committee know we have a solemn obligation not to idly squander what so many Americans have fought and died for.
Then why are you having a show trial with no opposition?
Margaret Thatcher said this: "Let it never be said that the dedication of those who love freedom is less than the determination of those who would destroy it." Let me assure every one of you this: our committee understands the gravity of this moment, the consequences for our nation. We have much work yet to do, and we will see you all in September. I request those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted witnesses and members from the room.
Okay.
Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
The people that are more important than the rest of us get to leave.
And
All right,
with
folks.
that, Congresswoman
So
Liz
let's cut
Cheney
that
of
off.
Wyoming.
Longest by far, worst by far, folks. I'm going to wrap it up, but I promised you this. So let me finish with this. Let me pull it up here real quickly. Get rid of the law there. Bring this up. This is a bit between Ari Melber and Peter Navarro. Let's see if I can get it up here real quickly. We may have to do an ad. So, yeah. So while the ad plays, I'll knock the ad out in a minute. Let me set this up. So the Green Bay sweep, the challenge to the Joe Biden certification, was what Trump was trying to do on January 6th. The plan was to have, and we may have the video coming up here later. Let me stop it. The plan was to bring in alternate slates from 6 to 7 battleground states, and then challenge under the Electoral Count Act of 1887 to challenge Biden's certification. In order to do that, you need a congressperson and a senator to do it. All right. Now, if you get them, and Trump had 8 senators, he had 139 congresspeople. If you do, then you can challenge certification. And the plan was to challenge Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and all these. And if they challenged enough over enough days, they were hoping to maybe throw it back to the states. Okay. Now I'm going to let Navarro explain to you the Green Bay sweep, and you get an idea what's going on here. Sorry.
The question for the start of the interview is, I just want to, what was the plan itself and who was in on it?
Okay, here we go.
Exactly, and I'm going to tell you that. The plan was...
Now again, this is Peter Navarro. He worked for Trump. He helped write the Navarro memo that documented the irregularities in the election, and this was their plan on January 6th.
We had over 100 congressmen and senators
139
on Capitol Hill ready to implement the sweep. The sweep was simply that. We were going to challenge the results of the election in the 6 battleground states. They were Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Nevada, and basically these were the places where we believed that if the votes were sent back to those battleground states and looked at again, that there would be enough concern amongst the legislatures that most or all of those states would decertify the election. That would throw the election to the House of Representatives. And I would say to you here, Ari, that all of this, again, it was in the lanes legally. It was prescribed by the Constitution. There is a provision to go, rather than through the Electoral College, to the House of Representatives. And all this required was peace and calm on Capitol Hill. And at 1 p.m., Senator Ted Cruz, and Gosar, a representative, started the Green Bay sweep beautifully, challenging the results of Arizona.
All right, now, folks, I want you to hear that, okay? That's from the horse's mouth. That was the plan. Now, we know at 1:10, when the Capitol got breached, all of them got taken back to their office. Now, what we heard tonight was contradictory of what I understood. What I understood was that when they came back in, there were no more objections. Apparently, tonight, they said there might have been a few more objections. But the whole point is all of the 139 congresspeople and all the 8 senators did not go through with the certification. So the committee has now had 8 hearings, and I have unfortunately watched every single solitary minute of every single one. I've live streamed all of them. I'm one of the few content creators out there who has. I know Robert Gouveia was doing it for a while, but then he since quit doing it live. But anyway, folks, they have never explained that. Because Trump wanted peace and quiet. He wanted you to peacefully and patriotically make your voice heard. Encourage them to do the objections, but don't breach the Capitol. And we know for a fact when the Capitol was breached, it all went down. So nobody wanted peace and quiet more than Trump. The committee has failed to explain that, largely because they're incompetent. They need to pick a lane. Pick a lane and say, hey, challenging Biden's certification under the act is criminal. Okay, fine. Then you can say, yeah, well, the riot got out of control. It's also his fault, but they don't concentrate on it. But they're trying to act like Trump House somehow wanted the violence, but the violence didn't help him. It stopped his very plan. Anyway, folks, we're going to wrap it up. And I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to clip it, share it with people. Hit that notification bell so you get notification. We're basically doing content. We're doing 2 or 3 live streams a day. We do a daily live stream about the events of the day, and then I'm doing 1 or more topics. In fact, let me pull up real quickly while we got it here. I'll pull up the YouTube channel, and you can see right here. We have videos up daily. So, for example, today, obviously you can see the January 6th hearing. We did one here exploring whether Trump can be charged with a crime for dereliction of duty. A couple of days ago, live, why Steve Bannon should be found not guilty. So if you subscribe to this channel, you'll get notified. And you turn that notification bell on, you'll get notification of these. But I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time.